Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Billy Ashworth, and I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 19 years now. People call me crazy for staying out here so long, but these mountains are in my blood. My great-grandpa settled in these hills back in the 1800s, and my family's been here ever since. I'm 44 years old, and I know every trail, every cave, and every hidden waterfall in this part of Tennessee. I've led 147 successful rescues in my time here. When folks get lost or hurt in the backcountry, they call me. I'm good at what I do because I respect these mountains, and they respect me back. At least, that's what I used to think. It was November 1987 when everything changed. Early snow had already dusted the peaks, and the killing frost had turned the leaves brown. I was working the Cataract Falls area, about 12 miles from Gatlinburg as the crow flies. Out there, you're 8 hours from the nearest road on foot, and the radio doesn't work in the deep valleys. My grandmother used to tell stories about these mountains. She said the Cherokee believed spirits lived in the rocks and caves, watching over the sacred places. Mountain guardians, she called them. I always figured it was just old folklore, something to scare kids into behaving. I was wrong about a lot of things back then. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. 3 experienced cavers had been missing for 4 days in the Devil's Den cave system. All 3 were good people I knew personally. Sarah Chen, a geology professor from the university, and brothers Tom and Mike Garrett, who'd been exploring caves since they were kids. Devil's Den sits at the bottom of a deep hollow between Cove Mountain and Buckeye Knob. It's a tricky cave system with tight squeezes and underground rivers. The entrance sits right under Cataract Falls, where the water drops 100 feet into a dark pool. I partnered up with Jake Morrison for the rescue. Jake was newer than me, only 5 years on the job, but he was solid. We packed our gear at dawn, Petzl helmets with carbide backup lights, 200 feet of climbing rope, first aid kit, emergency supplies, standard cave rescue protocol. The hike took us 4 hours through thick rhododendron bushes and old hemlock forest. The deeper we went into the hollow, the quieter it got. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The kind that presses against your ears and makes you want to whisper. Feels different out here, Jake said, as we approached the falls. He was right. The air felt heavy, like before a bad storm. Even the birds seemed to have left this part of the mountain. The only sound was water crashing down into the pool. When we reached the cave entrance, I knew something was wrong. The opening was partially blocked with massive stones, boulders that would take heavy equipment to move. But here's the weird part. They were stacked from the inside, like someone had tried to seal the cave from within. Sarah and the Garrett boys are strong, Jake said. But they couldn't move rocks this big. I knelt down to examine the stones. They were limestone, probably from deeper in the cave system, but how they got here made no sense. Maybe a rockfall, I said, though I didn't believe it. We squeezed through the gap between the boulders and dropped down into the cave. Right away, I noticed something else strange. It was warm inside, maybe 20 degrees warmer than outside. Cave temperatures usually stay steady year-round, around 55 degrees. Our headlamps cut through the darkness as we moved deeper. The cave stretched ahead in a long tunnel, with side passages branching off every 100 feet or so. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, echoing like footsteps. "Billy," Jake called from behind me. "Look at this." He was shining his light on the cave wall. In the soft clay, someone had pressed handprints. But these weren't normal human handprints. They were massive, maybe 10 inches across, and each one had 7 fingers instead of 5. The prints were pressed 3 inches deep into the clay, like they'd been made with incredible strength. "What do you think made these?" Jake asked. I didn't have an answer. In 19 years of cave rescue, I'd never seen anything like it. We kept moving, following the main passage. Our ropes showed scorch marks, like they'd been near a fire, but there was no sign of any flames. The temperature kept getting warmer the deeper we went. That's when we found Sarah. Sarah Chen was crushed against the ceiling 40 feet above the cave floor. I had to shine my light up twice before my brain could process what I was seeing. Her body was pressed into a narrow crack in the limestone, arms and legs twisted at impossible angles. There was no way she could have climbed up there, and no way she could have fallen and ended up in that position. "How did she get up there?" Jake whispered. "I don't know," my voice echoed strangely in the cave. "I don't know how that's even possible." We spent an hour trying to figure out how to get her down. The ceiling was too high for our rope, and the rock face was smooth as glass. Finally, we had to accept that recovering her body would require a bigger team with special equipment. "We need to find Tom and Mike," I said. "They might still be alive." We marked our position and kept moving deeper into the cave system. The main passage split into 3 tunnels. I checked my map, but something was wrong. According to the survey from 1962, there should only be 2 passages here. "Map's wrong," Jake said, looking over my shoulder. "Maps don't lie. I've been using this one for 15 years. But there it was, a 3rd tunnel, heading northeast. For now, carved smooth, as if it had been there for centuries. Water trickled along the floor, and warm air flowed out like breath. We decided to split up. Jake would check the 2 mapped passages while I explored the mystery tunnel. It went against standard cave rescue protocol, but we were running out of time. The new tunnel sloped downward for about 50 feet before opening into a huge chamber. My headlamp barely reached the far walls. The ceiling disappeared into blackness above my head. In the center of the chamber sat a pool of perfectly still water. That's when I heard the voice. It spoke in Cherokee first, words I recognized from my grandmother's stories. Then it switched to English, deep and rough like stones grinding together. "You do not belong here, son of the mountain." My headlamp flickered and went out. In the complete darkness, I fumbled for my backup light. When the carbide flame finally lit, I was alone in the chamber, but I could feel something watching me. "Who's there?" I called out. "Tom? Mike, is that you?" Silence. I checked the chamber thoroughly, but found no sign of the missing cavers. The walls were covered in strange markings, not Cherokee writing, but something older. Symbols carved deep into the limestone. When I made it back to the main passage, Jake was waiting for me. His face was pale, and his hands shook as he reloaded his headlamp. "Find anything?" I asked. "Yeah, found Mike Garrett." He paused, swallowing hard. "You're not going to like it." Jake led me to a side chamber, about a quarter-mile from the entrance. Mike's body sat against the far wall, in what looked like a peaceful position, like he'd just sat down to rest. But when I got closer, I saw the truth. He was partially embedded in the solid rock wall. The limestone had somehow flowed around his back and shoulders like thick mud, then hardened again. His face wore an expression of absolute terror. "That's not possible," I said. "Tell that to Mike." We spent another hour searching for Tom, but found nothing except more of those 7-fingered handprints. They appeared on walls, ceiling, and floor, sometimes in places no human could reach. "We need to get out of here and call for backup," Jake said. I agreed. But as we headed back toward the entrance, the cave began to change around us. Passages that had been straight became curved. Chambers we'd mapped were suddenly different sizes. My compass spun wildly, unable to find magnetic north. "Billy," Jake said, "I don't think we're alone down here." The temperature was rising. Sweat ran down my back despite the November cold outside. Our headlamps began to flicker in unison, as if something was interfering with the electrical systems. That's when the ground started to shake. It wasn't an earthquake. I'd felt those before. This was different, rhythmic, like massive footsteps. The sound echoed through the cave system, coming from deeper underground. Loose rocks fell from the ceiling. Our lights went out completely, leaving us in perfect darkness. In that blackness, I heard Jake scream. When I finally got my backup light working, he was gone. "Jake!" I shouted into the darkness. "Jake, where are you?" My voice echoed back from a dozen different directions. The cave system that had seemed familiar just minutes before now felt like an alien world. Passages branched off in directions that hadn't existed when we first mapped the area. I followed the sound of Jake's scream, but the tunnel twisted and turned in impossible ways. My compass was useless. The needle spun freely, unable to lock onto any direction. The air grew warmer with each step, and a smell filled my nose, hot stone and ancient earth. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I found a chamber I'd never seen before. The walls were covered in Cherokee symbols, but also something else. Handprints, hundreds of them, all with 7 fingers. They covered every surface from floor to ceiling, like a crowd of giants had pressed their hands against the stone. In the center of the chamber sat Tom Garrett. He was alive, thank God, but something was terribly wrong. Tom sat cross-legged on the cave floor, staring at the wall in front of him. His headlamp was dead, but he didn't seem to notice the darkness. "Tom," I called softly. "It's Billy Ashworth. I'm here to get you out." He didn't respond. I moved closer, shining my light on his face. His eyes were wide open but unfocused, like he was looking at something I couldn't see. "Tom, can you hear me?" Finally, he turned his head toward me. When he spoke, his voice was flat and emotionless. "It's been waiting," he said, "waiting for so long. The mountain is angry, Billy. We went too deep. We saw things we weren't supposed to see." "What things? What did you see?" "The keeper, the one who guards the sacred places." Tom's voice got quieter. "It showed me Sarah and Mike. It showed me what happens to people who don't respect the old ways." I knelt beside him, checking for injuries. He seemed physically fine, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. "Tom, we need to leave, right now." "Can you walk?" "You can't leave," he said. "It won't let you. Once you've seen the keeper, you're part of its domain." As if summoned by his words, the cave began to change again. The walls started to glow with a faint red light, like coals in a dying fire. The temperature rose another 10 degrees. Somewhere in the darkness, I heard Jake calling my name, but his voice seemed to come from impossible directions. Above, below, through solid stone. I helped Tom to his feet. He moved like a sleepwalker, but at least he could move. We started back toward what I hoped was the main passage, but the cave had become a maze. Tunnels led to rooms that hadn't existed before. Chambers connected to passages that defied the laws of physics. That's when I saw it for the first time. A shadow moved across the cavern wall, but there was nothing to cast it. The shadow was huge, the outline of a man 12 feet tall, but wrong somehow. Too many fingers, limbs that bent at strange angles. "Do you see it?" Tom whispered. "Yeah, I see it." The shadow turned toward us. Where its face should be, 2 points of red light glowed like hot coals. When it spoke, the voice came from the walls themselves. "You have disturbed the sacred place. You have brought machines and lights into the domain of the ancestors. Why?" I found my voice, remembering the Cherokee words my grandmother had taught me. "We came to help our friends. We mean no harm to the sacred places. Harm has already been done. The mountain bleeds from the wounds of the coal miners. The burial grounds cry out for protection. I am the keeper, and I guard what must be guarded." The red lights moved closer. The temperature in the cave rose to over 90 degrees. Sweat poured down my face as I tried to think of what to say. "The mining was long ago," I said. "We're not miners, we're protectors too. I've spent my whole life protecting these mountains." "You know the old words," the keeper said. "Your blood remembers. But your companion brought disrespect into my domain." That's when I heard Jake screaming again, closer this time. The sound came from a passage to our right, a tunnel that definitely hadn't been there when we entered the chamber. "Let him go," I called out. "Take me instead. I will take what I choose to take." The shadow on the wall began to move. It flowed across the stone like liquid darkness, growing larger and more solid with each passing moment. The red eyes brightened until they hurt to look at. Tom grabbed my arm. "We need to run, Billy, right now." But there was nowhere to run. The chamber had only one exit, and the shadow was flowing toward it. As we watched in terror, the shadow began to pull itself off the wall, becoming 3-dimensional. First just an outline, then a solid black mass, then something that looked almost human but wrong in every detail. The keeper stood 12 feet tall, made of living stone shot through with veins of coal. Its skin looked like granite, rough and gray, but it moved like flesh. 7 fingers on each massive hand, no face except those burning red eyes. "Choose," it said, its voice like an avalanche. "One stays to guard the sacred places. One may leave to warn the others." I looked at Tom, still dazed and confused from whatever he'd experienced. Then I thought about Jake, somewhere in the darkness, probably terrified out of his mind. "I'll stay," I said. The keeper tilted its massive head. "You would give your life for theirs?" "If that's what it takes." For a long moment, the only sound was dripping water, and the distant echo of Jake's cries. Then the keeper spoke again. "Your grandmother taught you well, son of the mountain. But the choice is not yours to make." The keeper moved toward the tunnel where Jake's screams echoed from the walls. Each step shook the entire cave system, sending rocks tumbling from the ceiling. I grabbed Tom's arm and followed, knowing I couldn't abandon my partner even if it meant facing this ancient guardian. The tunnel led to another chamber, this one massive beyond belief. Our lights couldn't reach the ceiling or the far walls. In the center, Jake hung suspended 20 feet above the ground, held in place by what looked like living stone. Tendrils of rock had grown from the cave floor to wrap around his arms and legs. "Billy," he screamed when he saw us. "Help me, this thing is crazy." The keeper emerged from the tunnel behind us, its form now fully solid. Up close, I could see the details that made my stomach turn. Its stone skin was covered in ancient Cherokee symbols, carved so deep they looked like scars. The coal veins running through its body pulsed with red light like a heartbeat. "This one showed no respect," the keeper said, gesturing toward Jake. "He mocked the sacred symbols. He defiled the burial chamber with his presence." "I didn't know," Jake shouted. "Nobody told me this was a burial ground." Ignorance is no excuse for disrespect. I stepped forward, trying to put myself between the keeper and Jake. "Please. He's young and stupid, but he's not evil. Let me teach him the proper ways." The keeper's red eyes fixed on me. "You speak the old tongue. You understand the sacred obligations. But can you answer for his actions?" Behind me, Tom was muttering in a voice barely above a whisper. "The burial mounds. We found the burial mounds. That's where it started." Mike wanted to take pictures. My blood ran cold. If they'd disturbed actual Cherokee graves, this was worse than I'd thought. The Cherokee considered their burial grounds to be among the most sacred places on earth. Disturbing them was an unforgivable sin. "Show me," I said. The keeper gestured, and the chamber began to change. The walls flowed like water, reshaping themselves. When they stopped moving, we were in a different place entirely. A vast underground cavern filled with ancient stone mounds. Each mound was maybe 6 feet long and 3 feet high, covered in symbols that hurt to look at. There were dozens of them, arranged in perfect circles around a central fire pit that still glowed with red coals after centuries. This was a Cherokee burial chamber, untouched since before the white man came to these mountains, and it had been vandalized. Modern equipment lay scattered around the sacred space: cameras, sample containers, measurement tools. Someone had dug into one of the burial mounds, leaving a gaping hole in its side. Bones were visible in the disturbed earth. "Mike wanted to document it," Tom said, his voice hollow. "Said it would be the archaeological find of the century." Sarah tried to stop him, but he wouldn't listen. The keeper's form grew brighter, the red light in its coal veins pulsing faster. "For 1,000 years, I have protected this place. The Cherokee elders charged me with keeping the ancestors safe from those who would disturb their rest." I understood now. This wasn't just some mountain spirit from my grandmother's stories. This was a guardian, created by the Cherokee to protect their most sacred sites. Mike Garrett had committed the worst possible violation, and now the keeper was making them all pay. "What do you want?" I asked. "What would make this right?" "The disturbance must be repaired. The sacred objects must be returned to their proper places. And the violators must answer for their crimes. Mike and Sarah are already dead. The third one remains." The keeper pointed at Jake, still suspended in the stone tendrils. "He participated in the desecration." "No," Jake screamed. "I didn't touch anything. I just took pictures." "Pictures steal the spirit," the keeper said. "This is known." I looked around the burial chamber, thinking fast. My grandmother had taught me some Cherokee traditions, but I was far from an expert. Still, I had to try something. "What if we fixed what was broken?" I said. "What if we restored the burial mound and held a proper ceremony for the ancestors who were disturbed?" The keeper considered this. "You would know the proper words?" "I would learn them. I would find Cherokee elders to teach me. And the photographs, the stolen images?" I looked at Jake. "The film gets destroyed. All of it. Everything they documented down here gets forgotten." "Billy, you can't be serious," Jake said. "This is the discovery of a lifetime." "Shut up, Jake. This isn't about discovery. This is about respect." The keeper moved closer to Jake, its massive stone fingers reaching toward him. "The choice is made. The violator will remain to guard what he has profaned. Wait. I stepped between them. There's another way. Cherokee law allows for substitution, doesn't it? Someone else can take responsibility for his actions. You would take his burden, if you'll accept it. The chamber fell silent, except for the sound of dripping water and Jake's panicked breathing. The keeper studied me with those burning red eyes. Your grandmother was Ayanna Ashworth, it said finally. I was startled. How do you know that? She spoke with me, long ago. When the coal miners came in the 1,890 seconds, she helped me seal their tunnels to protect the burial grounds. My mind reeled. My grandmother had known about the keeper. She'd actually spoken with this ancient guardian. She promised that her family would remember the old ways, the keeper continued. Are you prepared to honor that promise? I thought about everything I'd learned in these caves, about the importance of sacred places and the responsibility to protect them, about the Cherokee who had lived and died in these mountains long before my family arrived. Yes, I said, I'm prepared. The keeper released Jake, who fell to the cave floor gasping. Then it turned back to me. The sacred places will be your responsibility now. You will guard them as I have guarded them. You will learn the proper ceremonies and teach others to respect the old ways. And Jake, Tom, they go free. They will carry the memory of what they have seen. That burden is punishment enough. The red light in the keeper's coal veins began to fade. Its massive form started to blur around the edges. When others come seeking to disturb the sacred places, you will stop them. When developers wish to build on Cherokee graves, you will oppose them. When archaeologists wish to dig up the ancestors, you will turn them away. I understand. Do you? The keeper's voice was growing fainter. This is not a burden you can abandon. The mountains will watch you. I will watch you. If you fail in your obligation, you will answer for it. The stone guardian was becoming transparent now, merging back into the cave walls. As it faded, its final words echoed through the chamber. Remember the old ways, son of the mountain. Remember why the sacred places must be protected. And then we were alone. It took us 6 hours to find our way out of the cave system. Jake and Tom barely spoke during the hike back to civilization. When we finally reached the ranger station, I told my supervisor that the cave had suffered a major rockfall and was too unstable for rescue operations. Sarah and Mike's bodies were never recovered. The official report listed them as victims of a caving accident. Devil's Den cave system was permanently closed to the public, with steel grates installed over all known entrances. The area was declared geologically unstable and off-limits to all recreational activities. That was 6 months ago. Since then, I've spent every spare moment learning Cherokee traditions. I found elders who were willing to teach me the proper ceremonies for honoring the ancestors. I learned the songs and prayers that my grandmother had tried to teach me when I was too young to understand their importance. Tom Garrett left Tennessee a week after our experience in the cave. Last I heard, he was working as a librarian in Oregon, about as far from underground spaces as you can get. He still won't talk about what happened to us down there. Jake stayed with the Park Service, but he transferred to a different district. He destroyed all the photographs from our rescue mission, along with his personal camera equipment. Sometimes I catch him staring at the mountains with a haunted expression, like he's waiting for something to emerge from the stone. As for me, I've become something of an expert on Cherokee sacred sites in the Smoky Mountains. Officially, I'm just a ranger with an interest in local history. Unofficially, I'm the guardian the keeper made me become. 3 times this year, I've had to turn away people who wanted to explore the restricted areas. Twice, they were amateur archaeologists looking for artifact sites. Once it was a development company that wanted to survey the hollow for a potential resort project. I didn't have to threaten them or file official reports. I just told them the stories my grandmother had told me. Stories about mountain spirits who protect the sacred places. Stories about what happens to people who don't respect the old ways. Most of them listened. The ones who didn't found their equipment mysteriously malfunctioning. Compasses spinning wildly. GPS devices showing impossible readings. Camera batteries dying despite being fully charged. The mountains have ways of protecting themselves. Last week, I was hiking through the hollow near Devil's Den when I heard something that made my blood run cold. Voices echoing from inside the sealed cave system. Cherokee voices, chanting in the old language. I pressed my ear to the steel grate and listened. The chanting was ceremonial, peaceful. It sounded like a blessing being given, or a prayer of thanksgiving. I think the ancestors are resting easier now. My grandmother used to say that every mountain has its guardian, every sacred place has its keeper. She was right about that, just like she was right about so many other things I was too stubborn to believe. The Smoky Mountains are full of old spirits and ancient obligations. Most people who visit never encounter them, never realize they're walking through places that have been sacred for 1,000 years. They see beautiful views and hiking trails, not burial grounds and ceremonial sites. But the guardians are still here, waiting in the stone and shadow, watching to make sure the sacred places stay sacred. And now I'm watching too. Sometimes, on quiet nights, when the wind is still and the forest is silent, I can feel the keeper moving through the underground passages. Not hunting, not angry anymore, just making sure everything is as it should be. I keep my promise to honor the old ways. I protect the sacred places from those who would disturb them. I remember the stories my grandmother told, and I make sure they don't die with me, because some things are more important than discovery or progress or profit. Some places are meant to be left alone, protected by those who understand their true value. The keeper taught me that, and now I teach it to others, one way or another. The mountains remember everything, and they never forget. My name is Margaret Whitfield, but everyone calls me Maggie. I've been a forest ranger here in Virginia's Jefferson National Forest for 15 years now, and before that, I was a veterinarian for 8 years. People always ask why I gave up my practice to work out here in the mountains. The truth is, I had to. Back in 1971, something killed half the livestock in our county. Cows, horses, sheep, all found with their throats torn out. The farmers blamed wolves, but I knew better. I'd seen wolf kills before. This was different. Clean, too clean. Like whatever did it knew exactly where to bite. I spent months investigating those attacks, staying up all night in freezing barns, waiting for the killer to come back. I never found it, but the attacks stopped after the first frost. The farmers went back to their normal lives, but I couldn't. I sold my practice and came up here to the Mount Rogers area, where I could study predators full-time. That was the last time I believed in monsters. Now I work the Grayson Highlands, managing the wild pony herds and keeping track of bears and coyotes. It's good work, clean work. Everything up here has a reason, a pattern. Predators hunt because they're hungry. Animals migrate because seasons change. There's always a logical explanation. The station where I work sits at 5,200 feet, surrounded by open meadows that stretch for miles. In October, when the leaves turn red and gold, it's the most beautiful place on earth. The wild ponies graze between ancient boulders that have been here since before people walked these mountains. On clear nights, you can see stars you never knew existed. I love the isolation. The nearest ranger station is 2 hours away by mountain roads, and that's if the weather's good. Most of the time, it's just me, the ponies, and whatever wildlife wanders through. I've got my radio for emergencies, but I rarely need it. People in town still tell stories about these highlands. Old folks talk about the vampire beast that used to hunt up here in the 1,920 seconds. They say it could drain a full-grown horse in minutes, leaving nothing but a dried husk. Kids dare each other to camp up here during the full moon. Tourists come looking for ghost stories. I've heard every tale they tell, and I've investigated every one. In 15 years, I've found logical explanations for 200 livestock kills. Wild dogs, coyotes, the occasional black bear. Sometimes people just don't want to admit their prize bull died of old age or disease. But I'll say this, October is different up here. The air gets thin and cold, and sometimes the wind carries sounds that don't quite make sense. Animals act strange during harvest moon time. Even the ponies, who aren't afraid of anything, tend to bunch up tight at night. Still, I've never seen anything I couldn't explain. Not until 3 days ago. I was doing my evening rounds when I found them. 12 wild ponies, all dead, arranged in a perfect circle around one of the old stone formations. At first, I thought it might be lightning. We'd had storms the night before, but there were no burn marks, no signs of struggle. Each pony had 2 small puncture wounds in its neck, right at the jugular. That was it. No other trauma anywhere on their bodies. No missing flesh, No claw marks, nothing eaten. They just looked like they were sleeping, except they were completely drained of blood. I've been a veterinarian and a ranger for 23 years. I've seen animals killed by every predator that lives in these mountains. I know what wolf kills look like, what bear attacks do to a body, how wild dogs tear at their prey. This wasn't any of those things. I called Dr. Samuel Hayes, the state veterinarian, and asked him to come up first thing in the morning. Sam's been doing this work longer than I have, and he's seen things that would make most people quit the job. If anyone could explain what happened to those ponies, it would be him. That was 2 days ago. Sam should have been here by now, but he hasn't answered his radio since yesterday morning. Outside my window, the harvest moon is rising, bigger and redder than I've ever seen it. The ponies that are still alive have all moved down to the lower meadows, as far from the stone circle as they can get. For the first time in 15 years, I'm starting to think maybe some of those old stories aren't just stories after all. I found Dr. Hayes at dawn, 2 miles from where I'd discovered the dead ponies. He was lying face down in a small clearing, his truck parked nearby with the engine still running and the headlights on. Sam was 62 years old and built like a bear. In 30 years of veterinary work, he'd handled bulls, stallions, and angry mama bears, protecting their cubs. He wasn't the kind of man who scared easily, but when I rolled him over, his face was frozen in an expression of pure terror. Same 2 puncture wounds in his neck, same complete drainage of blood. His eyes were wide open, staring at something I couldn't see. His hands were clutched around his silver cross necklace, so tight I had to pry his fingers loose. The strangest thing was his truck. Sam was always careful about equipment. He'd never leave an engine running all night, never waste battery power on headlights when he wasn't using them. But everything was on, like he'd jumped out in a hurry and never made it back. I spent an hour going over the scene with my camera and evidence kit. The ground around Sam's body was torn up, like something had dragged him 20 feet from his truck. But there were no animal tracks, no human footprints either, just these strange marks in the dirt that looked almost like paw prints, but wrong. Too big for any cat that lived in these mountains, and they seemed to shift shape as I followed them. In one spot, they looked like bare human feet. 10 yards later, they were definitely cat paws with claws extended. I bagged samples of everything I could find and loaded Sam's body into my truck. The radio crackled to life as I was covering him with a tarp. Mount Rogers Base, this is State Police Dispatch. We have a possible missing persons report. Dr. Samuel Hayes failed to return home last night. Dispatch, this is Ranger Whitfield at Mount Rogers. I have Dr. Hayes here. I stopped, staring down at Sam's peaceful face. How do you explain something that makes no sense? He's deceased. Looks like an animal attack. Copy that, Ranger Whitfield. We'll send an investigation team. Negative on that, dispatch. Roads are too rough for regular vehicles. I'll bring him down myself. The truth was, I didn't want anyone else up here until I figured out what was happening. State police would ask questions I couldn't answer. They'd want explanations I didn't have. I drove Sam's body down to the medical examiner in town, then came straight back. Something was hunting in my mountains, and I intended to find it before it killed again. That afternoon, I hiked out to the stone circle where the ponies died. In daylight, the formation looked different than I remembered. The stones were arranged in a perfect spiral, each one carved with symbols I'd never noticed before. The grass inside the circle was dead, burnt black like acid had been poured on it. I was taking pictures when I heard the sound. It started as a low hum, almost below hearing. Then it grew into something like singing, but not quite human. The melody was beautiful and terrible at the same time, like a lullaby someone might sing to coax a child into dark water. The sound was coming from the trees at the edge of the meadow. I grabbed my binoculars and scanned the tree line, but saw nothing, just shadows and branches moving in the afternoon breeze. Then the singing stopped, and something moved. At first, I thought it was just a trick of light through the leaves. But as I watched, 2 red dots appeared in the darkness between the trees. They were too high up to be animal eyes, maybe 8 feet off the ground, and they glowed like embers in a fire. I kept my binoculars steady and watched those red lights for 10 minutes. They never moved, never blinked. Just stared back at me across the meadow with an intelligence that made my skin crawl. When I finally lowered the binoculars to wipe the sweat from my hands, the lights were gone. I spent the rest of the afternoon setting up motion cameras around the stone circle and the surrounding trees. If something was hunting in this area, I was going to get proof. Real evidence that would hold up to scientific investigation. By sunset, I had 12 cameras positioned in a grid pattern covering half a square mile. Each one was loaded with high-speed film and infrared flash units. Whatever was out there, I'd have pictures of it by morning. I was hiking back to my truck when I heard the ponies. They were screaming, not whinnying or neighing like horses do when they're frightened, screaming like people in pain, voices breaking with terror. I ran toward the sound, crashing through brush and jumping over fallen logs. The screaming got louder, more desperate. Then, suddenly, it stopped. I found them in a clearing I'd never seen before, though I'd hiked these trails 100 times. 7 ponies, all down, all drained. They were still warm. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the tracks around the bodies. Human footprints that changed to cat paws in mid-stride. I followed them to a large oak tree at the edge of the clearing. The bark was shredded 8 feet up the trunk, like something with very long claws had climbed it fast. At the base of the tree, pressed deep into the soft earth, was a single perfect handprint. A human handprint with claw marks where the fingertips should be. I looked up into the branches above me, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Something looked back. For just a moment, I saw a shape crouched on a thick branch 20 feet above my head. Human but wrong, too tall and lean, with eyes that reflected the last light of sunset like mirrors. Then it was gone, moving through the treetops faster than anything that size should be able to move. I ran back to my truck and radioed for backup. State Trooper Jennifer Walsh arrived the next morning with a face like granite and 40 years of police work behind her. She'd seen everything from murder scenes to meth labs, and nothing much surprised her anymore. Until she saw the latest pony kill site. Maggie, what the hell happened here? She was standing in the clearing, looking at the 7 drained carcasses arranged in a neat line. This doesn't look like any animal attack I've ever seen. I handed her my evidence folder, photos, soil samples, plaster casts of the strange tracks. See for yourself. Whatever did this is big, smart, and careful. It's not leaving much evidence behind. Jennifer knelt beside one of the ponies and examined the puncture wounds. 2 holes, perfectly placed. No tearing, no excess trauma. It's like someone used a medical instrument. Or fangs. She gave me a look. Fangs don't work this clean, Maggie. Even rattlesnake bites leave more damage than this. Then, how do you explain the complete blood loss? These animals were drained dry. Jennifer stood up and brushed dirt off her knees. I can't. But that doesn't mean we start believing in vampires. That's when Rex, Jennifer's German Shepherd tracking dog, started whining. Rex had been trained to track criminals through swamps, forests, and urban environments. He'd found missing children, escaped convicts, and bodies that had been buried for months. He was fearless, disciplined, and absolutely reliable. But now he was cowering behind Jennifer's legs, whimpering like a puppy. Rex, what's wrong with you? Jennifer tried to coax him toward the dead ponies. Come on, boy, do your job. The dog wouldn't move. He kept looking toward the tree line with his ears flat against his head, making soft whining sounds I'd never heard from a police dog before. He's never acted like this, Jennifer said. Something's got him spooked. I was about to answer when we heard the singing. It was the same beautiful, terrible melody I'd heard the day before, but closer now, much closer. The sound seemed to come from all around us, echoing off the trees and rocks until we couldn't tell which direction it was coming from. Rex bolted. Just turned and ran, crashing through the brush toward the parking area. We could hear him barking frantically, but the sound got farther and farther away. Jesus, Jennifer whispered. What is that? The singing grew louder, and I noticed something strange happening to Jennifer's face. Her eyes were getting glassy, unfocused. Her breathing slowed down, and a dreamy smile started to spread across her lips. Jennifer, I grabbed her arm and shook her. Jennifer, look at me. She blinked, and the smile faded. What? What happened? You were listening to the singing, really listening. I don't hear any singing, but I did. And it was getting closer. I pulled out my service radio and called for immediate backup. Mount Rogers Base to all units. Officer needs assistance at grid reference 77 Delta. Possible dangerous wildlife encounter. The radio crackled, but no clear response came through. Just static and something that might have been whispering. We need to get out of here, I told Jennifer. Now, we hiked back toward our vehicles as fast as we could without running. Behind us, The singing continued, sometimes close, sometimes distant, always beautiful and always wrong. We were almost to the parking area when Jennifer stopped dead. "Maggie, look at the trees." I followed her gaze and felt my blood turn cold. The trees around us were covered with claw marks, fresh ones, white wood showing through the bark. They started at ground level and went up 15, 20 feet. Some of the marks were deep enough to put my whole hand inside. "No bear did this," Jennifer said. "Bears don't climb that high, and they don't have claws this big. Look at the pattern." I pointed to a massive oak tree that had been completely shredded. "It's not random. See how the marks form symbols?" The claw marks did look deliberate. Almost like writing, if writing could be made with 4-inch claws. The symbols were repeated on tree after tree, forming a message we couldn't read. That's when the missing hiker's tent showed up. We found it hung in the branches of a tall pine, 30 feet off the ground. The tent was shredded but still recognizable, bright blue with yellow trim. The same one described in the missing persons report from 3 days ago. "How did it get up there?" Jennifer asked. "Something put it there. Something that can climb very well." Inside the torn tent, caught on the aluminum frame, was a piece of human clothing, a flannel shirt with dark stains that could have been blood. Jennifer pulled out her radio. "This is Unit 77 calling search and rescue. We need a team at Mount Rogers immediately. We have evidence of the missing hikers." More static. Then, clear as day, a voice that sounded almost like Jennifer answered back. "Unit 77, this is dispatch. Cancel that request. The hikers have been found safe." Jennifer and I looked at each other. She hadn't let go of her radio button. "Dispatch, please confirm. Where were the hikers located?" "They're with us now, Jennifer. They're waiting for you." The voice on the radio was definitely Jennifer's voice, but Jennifer was standing right beside me. "That's not dispatch," I whispered. Jennifer keyed her radio again. "Dispatch, what's my badge number?" "Your badge number is 2847, Officer Walsh. And you're very tired, aren't you? You've been walking for so long. Why don't you come rest? We have a nice, warm place prepared for you." Jennifer's eyes were getting glassy again. She took a step toward the trees, then another. I slapped the radio out of her hand and it went flying into the brush. "Jennifer, whatever's talking to you, don't listen to it." She blinked and shook her head. I was going to follow the voice. It sounded so reasonable, so familiar. It sounded like you because it was copying you. Whatever we're dealing with, it can mimic human voices. The sun was getting low, and shadows were growing longer between the trees. I realized we'd been in the woods for almost 6 hours, but it felt like minutes. "We need to get back to base before dark," I said. "I've got floodlights and a generator there, and guns." But when we got to the parking area, Jennifer's patrol car was gone. Just gone, like it had never been there. My truck was still there, but all 4 tires had been slashed. Not cut with a knife, torn apart by claws. We were stranded on the mountain with something that could mimic voices, climb trees like a cat, and move a 2-ton police car without leaving tracks. And the sun was setting. The singing started again as darkness fell, coming from every direction at once. This time, it wasn't just beautiful and terrible. This time, it knew our names. "Maggie," the voice sang sweetly. "Jennifer. Come and see what we've prepared for you." We made it back to my station, just as full darkness settled over the mountains. I'd never been so happy to see electric lights in my life. The ranger station was built like a fortress. Thick log walls, heavy shutters on the windows, and a generator that could keep the lights on all night. I'd always thought the design was overkill for a wildlife management post. Now I understood why the old-timers had built it that way. "Help me secure the windows," I told Jennifer. We pulled the shutters closed and threw the heavy wooden bars across them. "Whatever's out there, it's not getting in without a fight." I checked my radio equipment, but all I got was static. The telephone line had been cut. We were completely cut off from the outside world. "Maggie, look at this." Jennifer was standing at my desk, holding an old leather journal I'd never seen before. "I found it in your bookshelf. It's dated 1924. The journal belonged to someone named Edgar Whitmore, who'd been a ranger in these same mountains almost 60 years ago. His handwriting was shaky, like he'd been writing in a hurry or under stress. Jennifer read aloud from the first entry. "October 15th, 1924. The beast has returned to Grayson Highlands. Found 12 cattle drained of blood near the old stone circle. Sheriff thinks it's wild dogs, but I know better. I've seen this before. My hands were shaking as I took the journal from her. I flipped through pages of entries describing attacks that matched exactly what we'd been finding. Livestock arranged in circles, 2 puncture wounds with complete blood drainage. Strange tracks that shifted from human to animal. But Edgar Whitmore had discovered something we hadn't. October 20th, 1924, tracked the creature to its lair in the high caves. It speaks with the voices of its victims, calling to me with my own mother's words. The beast was once a man named Tobias Crane, cursed by Cherokee medicine man after he murdered 3 tribal children in 1847. Cursed? Jennifer looked skeptical. Come on, Maggie, you don't believe in curses. I kept reading. The curse transforms him during blood moon cycles. He feeds to maintain his unnatural life, growing stronger with each kill. Silver burns him, running water slows him down, but only complete destruction will end his reign. That's when something started scratching at the shutters. The sound was rhythmic, deliberate, like someone drawing letters with their fingernails on the wood, or like something with very long claws was trying to write a message. Let me in, Maggie. The voice came from right outside the window. It sounded exactly like Dr. Samuel Hayes. I'm hurt. I need help. Sam's dead, I whispered to Jennifer. I saw his body. I know you saw me, Maggie, but I wasn't really dead. Just unconscious. Please, I'm bleeding. I need a veterinarian. The voice was perfect. Every inflection, every slight rasp that Sam had from smoking too many cigarettes. If I hadn't seen his corpse myself, I would have opened that shutter. Don't listen, I told Jennifer, no matter how convincing it sounds. The scratching stopped. Then a different voice started calling from the back of the station. Jennifer? Jennifer, it's Rex. I found the way home. Come let me in, girl. Jennifer took a step toward the back door before catching herself. That's my dog's voice. But Rex doesn't talk. He does now, I said. Don't you, Rex? I called out loudly. The voice from outside chuckled. It was a sound no dog could make. You're very clever, Ranger Whitfield. But you can't stay in there forever. I grabbed my rifles from the gun cabinet, a .308 for long-range work, and a 12-gauge shotgun loaded with buckshot. Jennifer, do you have silver bullets? Are you insane? Nobody carries silver bullets. I dumped out my jewelry box on the desk. A silver bracelet, some earrings, and my wedding ring from my marriage that ended 5 years ago. I'd kept wearing the ring out of habit. Help me melt these down. If Edgar Whitmore was right, silver is the only thing that can hurt this creature. We used my camping stove to heat the jewelry in a metal cup. The silver melted faster than I expected, forming a small puddle of liquid metal. How are we going to get silver into bullets? Jennifer asked. We're not. We're going to coat them. I pulled the buckshot pellets out of several shotgun shells and dipped them in the molten silver. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. Outside, the scratching sounds were moving around the building. From the windows to the door, from the door to the roof. Something was testing our defenses, looking for a way in. Maggie, a new voice called from the chimney. It was my own voice, speaking to me from above. This is crazy. There's no such thing as monsters. You're having a breakdown. Just walk outside and everything will make sense. Hearing my own voice telling me to give up was the most unsettling thing yet. I could feel the logic of it, the reasonableness. It would be so easy to just open the door and end this nightmare. Jennifer grabbed my arm. Stay with me, Maggie. That's not you talking. The scratching sounds stopped. For several minutes, everything was quiet. Then we heard footsteps on the roof, walking slowly from one end of the building to the other. The footsteps stopped directly above us. Something started coming down the chimney. I aimed my shotgun at the fireplace and waited. Jennifer positioned herself by the door with my spare rifle. What came out of the chimney wasn't what I expected. It looked human at first glance. About 6 feet tall, wearing clothes that might have been fashionable in the 1800s. But the proportions were wrong. The arms were too long, the fingers ended in claws, and the face was a mixture of human and feline features. Its eyes were the same red lights I'd seen in the forest. "Hello, Margaret," it said in a voice like silk over broken glass. "My name is Tobias Crane. I've been waiting to meet you for a very long time. You're the one who's been killing the animals." I'm the one who's been feeding. Tobias smiled, showing fangs that were definitely not human. Do you know how long I've been hungry, Margaret? How many years I've slept in the cold caves, waiting for the blood moon to wake me? The journal said you were cursed in 1847. That's over 130 years. 132 years, 4 months, and 6 days. His voice was hypnotic, drawing me in despite my fear. But who's counting? Jennifer raised her rifle, but Tobias looked at her, and she froze mid-motion. Don't worry about your friend, he told me. She'll stay perfectly still until I'm ready for her. Now, where were we? Ah yes, my story. I kept my shotgun aimed at his chest, but found myself wanting to hear what he had to say. There was something compelling about his presence, something that made listening feel more important than fighting. I came to these mountains in 1847 to hunt Cherokee families for the bounty money. $3 per scalp, no questions asked. It was good work until I made a mistake. You killed children. I killed 3 Cherokee children who were picking berries near the stone circle. But one of them was the granddaughter of a powerful medicine man. He placed a curse on me that night. I would live forever, but only by drinking the blood of innocents. Tobias moved closer, and I could smell something like copper and decay coming off him. At first I thought it was a blessing. Eternal life, superhuman strength, the ability to take any form I chose. But the hunger, Margaret, the hunger never stops. So you feed during blood moons. When the moon is full and red, I wake. I feed. And then I sleep again until the next cycle. He gestured toward Jennifer, who was still frozen in place. Your friend will make an excellent meal. Young, healthy, full of life. That broke the spell. I pulled the trigger. The silver-coated buckshot hit Tobias' center mass, and he screamed, a sound like metal tearing that made my teeth ache. Where the silver touched him, his flesh smoked and burned. But he didn't go down. Instead, he changed. His human appearance melted away, revealing something that was part man, part mountain lion, and part nightmare. He grew another foot taller, his muscles bulged with unnatural strength, and his claws extended to the length of kitchen knives. You've just made me very angry, Margaret. What happened next was the longest 5 minutes of my life. Tobias came at me with inhuman speed, but the silver had slowed him down just enough. I managed to dodge his first swipe and hit him with another blast from my shotgun. This time, the silver-coated pellets took off part of his left arm. He howled and retreated to the far side of the room, black blood streaming from his wounds. You can't kill me, he snarled. I've survived for over a century. I'll survive this too. Maybe, I said, reloading with my last silver-coated shells, but it's going to hurt the whole time. Jennifer suddenly snapped out of her trance and opened fire with the rifle. Regular bullets wouldn't kill Tobias, but they staggered him, keeping him off balance while I lined up another shot. I put the third blast right in his face. Tobias fell backward through my front door, tearing it clean off its hinges. I followed him outside, Jennifer right behind me. He was lying in the dirt, most of his head missing, but still moving, still trying to regenerate. The journal said complete destruction, Jennifer panted. How do we destroy something that won't die? I looked around desperately and saw my truck. The gas tank had been ruptured when he'd slashed the tires, and fuel was pooled all over the ground. Fire, I said. We burn everything. I grabbed a flare from my emergency kit and lit it. Tobias saw what I was planning and tried to crawl away, but the silver had done too much damage. He could barely move. Wait, he gasped, his voice barely human now. I can tell you things. Secrets about these mountains. About others like me. Maybe next lifetime, I said, and threw the flare. The gasoline ignited instantly, creating a column of fire that lit up the whole mountainside. Tobias screamed one last time, then crumbled to ash faster than seemed possible. Within minutes, there was nothing left but a scorch mark on the ground and the smell of sulfur in the air. Jennifer and I sat on my front steps and watched the fire die down. Neither of us spoke for a long time. What do we put in our report? She finally asked. Gas leak explosion, I said. Destroyed the station and all evidence. Dr. Hayes died in a hiking accident. The missing campers were found safe in another state. And the ponies? Poisoned water source. Happens sometimes after heavy rains wash chemicals down from old mining sites. Jennifer nodded slowly. Think anyone will believe it? People believe what makes sense to them. Nobody wants to hear about monsters. The sun was coming up over the mountains, and I could hear normal forest sounds returning. Birds singing, squirrels chattering, the distant whinny of ponies in the lower meadows. But I also heard something else. Jennifer's dog, Rex, barking from somewhere down the mountain. He'd apparently survived his panic and was trying to find his way back to us. "What about next month?" Jennifer asked. "The journal said he feeds during blood moon cycles. If we killed him, does that mean it's over?" I showed her the last entry in Edgar Whitmore's journal. October 31st, 1924. Destroyed the beast with silver and fire. The Cherokee medicine man told me this would end the curse. But he also warned me that evil like this never truly dies. It just sleeps until someone awakens it again. So we're not done. We're done with Tobias Crane. But the old stories mention other creatures in these mountains. Things that wake up during certain moon phases, or when blood is spilled on the stone circles, or when people go missing in the deep caves. I closed the journal and tucked it into my jacket. "I'm putting in for a transfer. You should too. Find a nice quiet job in a city somewhere, where the worst thing you have to worry about is regular human criminals." Jennifer stood up and brushed ash off her uniform. "What about you? Are you really leaving?" I looked out over the Grayson Highlands, where the morning mist was rising from the meadows, and the wild ponies were coming back to graze. It was still the most beautiful place on earth. It was also the most dangerous. "Someone has to watch," I said. "Someone has to be ready for whatever wakes up next." 3 weeks later, I got my new assignment, a promotion to Regional Supervisor for Supernatural Wildlife Management. It's not an official title, of course. Officially, I investigate unusual predator behavior and wildlife disease patterns. Unofficially, I keep track of the old stories. I maintain a network of rangers, veterinarians, and local residents who know what to look for. When something that shouldn't exist starts leaving evidence that can't be explained, they call me. The phone rings more often than you'd think. Last week, I got a report from Kentucky about livestock found drained of blood near an abandoned coal mine. 2 weeks ago, a ranger in Tennessee sent me photos of tracks that changed from human to wolf in mid-stride. And yesterday, Jennifer called to tell me that 3 hikers had gone missing in the North Carolina mountains during the new moon. Their camp was found arranged in a perfect circle around an ancient stone formation. I've learned to sleep with silver jewelry on, and I keep a bag packed with emergency supplies. Flares, motion cameras, silver-coated ammunition, and Edgar Whitmore's journal. Because Tobias Crane was just the beginning. The Appalachian mountains are full of old stories, old curses, and old hungers that wait in the dark places for someone foolish enough to wake them up. My job is to make sure they stay sleeping. Most of the time, I've created Blood Moon Harvest, a 4,950-word horror story following your detailed prompt requirements. The story is structured in 5 parts, following the specified word counts and timing, uses simple, accessible language, and tells the complete narrative of Forest Ranger Maggie Whitfield's encounter with a supernatural predator in Virginia's mountains. My name is Thomas Blackburn, but everyone calls me Tom. I've been a ranger in the Monongahela National Forest for 22 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these West Virginia mountains could throw at me. Bears, lost hikers, drug runners, even a few folks who'd gone a bit crazy from too much time alone in the wilderness. But I'd never seen anything that couldn't be explained by common sense and experience. I grew up in these mountains, son of a coal miner who spent his life breathing dust underground. When I was 18, I swore I'd never work in the dark like my daddy did. The Forest Service was my way out, and I never looked back. 22 years of hiking these trails, maintaining the campsites, and helping lost tourists find their way home. I knew every hollow, every ridge, every old logging road from Seneca Rocks to the Cranberry Wilderness. The Dolly Sods area was my specialty, that high plateau country where the weather could turn deadly in minutes, 4,000 feet up, exposed to winds that came howling down from Canada. In winter, it was like stepping onto another planet. Red spruce trees twisted by decades of ice storms, cranberry bogs frozen solid, and silence so deep it made your ears ring. People called me when they needed someone who knew the backcountry history. I'd documented over 500 historical sites in my territory, old homesteads, logging camps, mining operations that had been swallowed by the forest decades ago. Most folks don't realize how many people used to live up in these mountains. Whole communities that just disappeared when the work dried up or disaster struck. There was one place I knew better than most, an old logging settlement up on the plateau that had been abandoned since the 1922. Nothing left now but stone foundations and a few rotting timbers, but I'd spent hours up there researching the history. 23 children had died there during the influenza outbreak of 1918, all in one terrible week in December, when the snow was so deep nobody could get out for help. The whole community just packed up and left after that. Too many ghosts, the survivors said. I'd always rolled my eyes at that kind of talk. Ghost children, spirits calling from the woods. It was all just wind in the hollows and imagination running wild. In 22 years of walking these mountains alone, often in the dead of night, I'd never heard anything that couldn't be explained by wildlife or weather. That was before December 1983. The call came in on a Tuesday morning, crackling through the radio static as an ice storm knocked out half the towers in the region. 2 snowshoers had made it out of the Dolly Sods area, claiming they'd heard children calling for help near the old settlement site. They were shook up bad, kept talking about voices in the storm, little voices begging for help. Probably just wind, I told Eddie Kozlov, my partner for winter patrols. Eddie was younger than me, only 5 years on the job, but he was solid. Grew up in Pittsburgh, thought the mountains were the most beautiful place on earth. Sound carries funny up there when the weather's bad. But the snowshoers had been specific. Children's voices, they said, clear as anything. Crying and calling for help from somewhere in the ruins of the old town. They'd tried to find them, but the snow was too deep, and the storm was getting worse. They barely made it out themselves. Eddie and I loaded our winter gear into the truck. Snowshoes, emergency shelter, medical supplies, enough food and fuel for 3 days if we got trapped. The temperature was dropping fast, and the weather service was calling for another foot of snow before nightfall. You really think there's kids up there? Eddie asked as we drove the rough forest road toward the trailhead. Shouldn't be, I said, checking the map one more time. No registered camping permits for that area. No legal access roads that time of year, but we have to check. The last mile to the settlement site was brutal. 3 feet of fresh snow over a layer of ice, and the wind was picking up. Every step was a struggle, even with the snowshoes. Eddie was breathing hard by the time we reached the edge of the old town site. Jesus, he said, stopping to catch his breath. How'd anybody ever live up here? I was wondering the same thing as we approached the stone foundations that were all that remained of the old community. The wind was howling now, and snow was starting to fall harder. In weather like this, it was easy to imagine voices in the storm. The first thing I noticed was the tracks. They were small, child-sized, and fresh enough that snow hadn't filled them in completely. They led from the tree line across the open area where the old settlement had been, weaving between the stone foundations like someone was exploring the ruins. Tom, Eddie called from near what used to be the schoolhouse. His voice had a strange edge to it. You need to see this. I snowshoed over to where he was crouched near one of the larger foundation holes. It had probably been a cellar once, and the opening was partially covered by fallen timbers. Eddie was shining his flashlight down into the darkness. What is it? More tracks, he said, leading right to the edge, like someone went down there. I knelt beside him and looked. Sure enough, the small footprints led directly to the cellar opening and disappeared into the black hole below. But that didn't make sense. The opening was maybe 18 inches wide between the fallen beams, too narrow for an adult, but just wide enough for a child. Hello, Eddie called down into the darkness. Is anyone down there? We're park rangers. We're here to help. The wind swallowed his words, but for just a second, I thought I heard something else. A sound like crying, very faint, coming from the depths of the cellar. Did you hear that? Eddie asked. Just wind, I said automatically, but I wasn't sure. Let's check the other foundations. We found more tracks around every building site. Always the same size, always child-sized, leading to and from the ruins like kids had been playing there. But the snow was still falling, and these tracks were sharp and clear. They had to be fresh, made within the last few hours. This doesn't make sense, Eddie muttered, following one set of prints that led from the old church foundation to what might have been a general store. How would kids even get up here? It's 15 miles from the nearest road. I was thinking the same thing, but I didn't like the other possibilities that were starting to form in my mind. Lost kids in weather like this would be dead by morning. And if they'd fallen into one of those cellars, we need to check every foundation, I said. If there really are children up here, they're in serious trouble. The snow was getting heavier, and the temperature was dropping fast. According to my thermometer, it was already down to -15, and that was before the wind chill. We worked methodically, checking each foundation hole, calling down into the darkness. Most were partially filled with debris and decades of fallen leaves, but a few were deep enough to hide someone. At the fourth foundation, we got an answer. "Help us," came a small voice from the darkness below. "Please help us. We're so cold." Eddie and I looked at each other. The voice was definitely real. Definitely a child. A girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old. "We're coming," Eddie shouted down. He was already taking off his pack, pulling out rope and emergency gear. "How many of you are down there?" "All of us," came the reply, so faint we had to strain to hear it. "We're all so cold. Please don't leave us." All of them. How many was that? And how had children ended up trapped in a cellar in the middle of nowhere during a blizzard? Eddie tied the rope around his waist and prepared to rappel down into the foundation hole. It was about 10 feet deep, with stone walls that were slick with ice. "Be careful," I said, but I was already checking my own gear. For if there were multiple children down there, we were going to need all the help we could get. Eddie disappeared into the darkness, his flashlight beam dancing off the walls. I could hear him moving around down there, talking to the children in the calm, reassuring voice we'd been trained to use in emergencies. "I can't see them," his voice echoed up from below. "But I can hear them. They sound really weak." I knelt at the edge of the hole. "How many?" "I don't know. They keep moving." "Jesus, it's cold down here. My thermometer is reading -80. That can't be right." -80? That was impossible. Even in the worst weather, it wouldn't be that cold in a sheltered cellar. I checked my own thermometer again. Still -15. "Eddie, you need to get out of there. Something's wrong." But Eddie wasn't listening. He was talking to the children, trying to locate them in the darkness. I could hear his voice getting excited. "I found something," he called up. "There's clothing down here. Old clothing. Really old." "What kind of clothing?" "Like historical old. Wool coats, button-up shoes, the kind of stuff you see in museums." His voice was getting strange, tight with something that might have been fear. "Tom, this clothing, it's perfectly preserved. Like it was just put here yesterday." I felt ice in my stomach that had nothing to do with the weather. "Eddie, come up now." "Wait, there's something else." His voice was barely audible now. "Tom, there are names sewn into these clothes. Mary Catherine Morrison, age 7. James Patrick Kelly, age 9. Sarah Elizabeth." He stopped talking suddenly. "Eddie, Eddie, answer me." The silence stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then Eddie's voice came up from the cellar, high and scared. "Tom, I can see them now. They're right here in front of me. But something's wrong. Something's really wrong." "What do you mean something's wrong?" I called down into the darkness, but Eddie's voice was already changing, taking on a weird, echoing quality that made my skin crawl. "They're so pale," he whispered. "So pale they're almost see-through, and their eyes, God, their eyes are like black holes. They're reaching for me, Tom. Their hands are so cold." I grabbed my flashlight and shined it down into the cellar. Eddie was pressed against the far wall, staring at something I couldn't see. His breath was coming out in huge white puffs, like he was breathing in a freezer. "Eddie, get on the rope now. We're getting out of here." But instead of moving toward the rope, Eddie took a step forward, toward whatever he was seeing. His movements were jerky, unnatural, like someone learning to walk. "They need help," he said, and his voice sounded dreamy, distant. "They've been waiting so long. They're so cold, Tom. They just want to be warm again." That's when I heard them. Children's laughter, coming from all around me, not from the cellar, from everywhere. Behind me, to my left, to my right. Soft, musical laughter that didn't belong in a place where 23 children had died of influenza 65 years ago. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the falling snow. At the edge of the light, just where vision started to fade, I saw movement. Small shapes, child-sized, darting between the stone foundations. When I swung the light toward them, they vanished, but I could still hear them laughing. "Tom!" Eddie's voice from the cellar was panicked now. "Tom, help me! I can't move." My feet, I can't feel my feet. I dropped to my belly and looked down into the hole. Eddie was standing in the same spot, but now I could see frost forming on his jacket, his hair, his eyebrows. Icicles were actually growing from his breath as he exhaled. "Grab the rope," I shouted. He tried to move toward it, but his legs wouldn't respond. I could see ice crystals spreading across his clothing, and his skin was taking on a bluish tint that meant serious hypothermia. Above me, the children's laughter was getting closer. I tied my own rope around the nearest foundation stone and rappelled down into the cellar. The cold hit me like a physical blow, not just cold air, but cold that seemed to leach the warmth right out of my bones. My thermometer was going crazy, the numbers dropping so fast I couldn't read them. "Eddie, we have to move now." But Eddie was staring past me at something behind my shoulder. His lips were blue, and when he spoke, his words came out in visible puffs of vapor. "Don't you see them?" he whispered. "They're everywhere, all the children. They want us to stay with them." I turned around. The cellar wasn't empty anymore. 23 children stood in the darkness behind me, ranging in age from maybe 5 to 12. They were dressed in old-fashioned winter clothing, wool coats, knit caps, button-up boots, but their skin was corpse-pale, with a blue tint around their lips and fingernails. Their eyes were deep black holes that seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it, and they were all reaching toward us with hands that trailed wisps of frost like dry ice. "We've been so cold," one of them said, a little girl with long dark hair frozen into icicles around her face. "So cold for so long. Will you help us get warm?" I grabbed Eddie's arm and felt ice crystals crunch under my glove. His jacket was frozen solid, and when I looked closer, I could see his skin through tears in the fabric. It was white as snow, with dark patches that meant frostbite was setting in fast. "Will you stay with us?" asked a little boy with a face like carved ice. "We get so lonely up here. Everybody always leaves." The children were moving closer, and everywhere they stepped, frost spread across the ground. The air around them shimmered with cold that was beyond anything possible in nature. I tried to drag Eddie toward the rope, but my own muscles were seizing up from the cold. Every breath felt like inhaling razor blades, and I could feel my core temperature dropping by the second. "Please don't go," whispered a girl who couldn't have been more than 6. "We just want friends. We've been waiting so long for friends." That's when I understood. These weren't just ghost children. They were children who had died in the cold, frozen to death during that terrible week in 1918 when the influenza killed them one by one and nobody could get out for help. They'd been trapped here ever since, trapped in that last moment of desperate cold, and they wanted to share it with anyone who came close enough. "We have to go," I managed to say through chattering teeth. "We have to get out of here now." But the children were all around us now, their frost-trailing hands reaching out. When the little girl touched my jacket, the fabric crackled and turned white. I could feel the cold shooting through the material like electricity. "Just for a little while," she whispered. "Just until we're not cold anymore." Eddie collapsed next to me, his skin now completely white. Ice crystals were forming in his hair, in his eyebrows. His breathing was shallow and rapid, the final stages of severe hypothermia. I knew we had maybe minutes before we joined the 23 children who'd been waiting here since 1918. And somehow, I didn't think death was going to be the end of it. Above us, I could hear more voices now. Adult voices, calling out names. Mary Catherine, James Patrick, Sarah Elizabeth. The voices of parents who'd lost their children 65 years ago and were still looking for them in this cursed place. The children around us stopped reaching and turned toward the voices, with expressions of infinite sadness. "Mama's calling," whispered the little girl with the icicle hair. "But we can't go to her. We're too cold, always too cold." And that's when I remembered something I'd read in the historical records. Something about a memorial stone that had been placed at the settlement site after everyone left. A marker for the 23 children who died that terrible winter. If I could get us to that marker, maybe. "Come on, Eddie," I gasped, hauling him to his feet. "We're going up." Getting Eddie up that rope was the hardest thing I'd ever done in 22 years as a ranger. He was barely conscious, his body temperature so low that his muscles had stopped working properly. The frost children watched us climb with those horrible black hole eyes, reaching up with hands that trailed freezing mist. "Don't leave us," they called as we scrambled over the edge of the foundation. "Please don't leave us alone again." But I couldn't think about that now. Eddie was dying. His lips were purple, his skin was waxy white, and when I checked his pulse, it was so slow and weak I could barely feel it. We needed shelter, we needed heat, and we needed it now. The problem was, the children hadn't stayed in the cellar. As soon as we reached ground level, I could see them everywhere. 23 small figures moving through the falling snow around the old settlement site, their voices calling out in a chorus that made my heart break despite my terror. "Help us, we're so cold, why won't anyone help us?" They moved differently above ground, floating a few inches off the snow, their feet never quite touching the earth. Where they passed, the temperature dropped even further. My breath was coming out in great white clouds, and ice was forming on my jacket zipper. "Eddie, stay with me," I said, shaking my partner's shoulder. His eyes were open but unfocused, and when he spoke, his words were slurred. "So cold," he mumbled, "just like them." I could feel it too. The supernatural cold was spreading outward from the children like a plague, making the already brutal mountain winter feel like stepping into deep space. My hands were going numb inside my gloves, and I was starting to lose feeling in my feet. But somewhere in my freezing brain, a memory was fighting to surface. Something I'd read in the old county records about this place. The memorial stone. Where was the memorial stone? I tried to think. The settlement had been built around a natural clearing on the plateau. The main cluster of buildings had been in the center, with the church and schoolhouse on the north side. The memorial would have been placed somewhere central, somewhere everyone could see it. "Where are you going?" called one of the children, a boy who looked about 10, with frost covering his dark hair like a cap. "Don't you want to play with us?" They were following us now as I half-carried, half-dragged Eddie through the snow. Everywhere we went, they went too, their presence dropping the temperature another few degrees. I could feel my core body heat being sucked away, pulled into the vortex of supernatural cold that surrounded them. "We've been alone for so long," said the little girl with the icicle hair. She was floating just a few feet away, her black eyes fixed on my face. "Everyone always leaves, but you could stay. You could be our friend forever." Forever. Like they'd been trapped here forever, dying of cold over and over again for 65 years. That's when I saw it. A dark shape in the snow near the center of the clearing, a stone marker, almost completely buried by decades of winter storms. I could just make out the top edge, and carved letters that were barely visible in my flashlight beam. "In memory of the children lost to winter's cold." I dragged Eddie toward the memorial stone, fighting through snow that was now knee-deep. Behind us, the voices of the children were getting more urgent, more desperate. "Don't go there," called the boy with the frosty hair. "That place hurts us. Please don't go there." But I kept moving, because now I understood. The memorial wasn't just a marker. It was a boundary. A place where the children could finally rest, if someone would just help them find it. "They're getting closer," Eddie mumbled. His voice was barely audible, but at least he was still conscious. "Tom, I can see their parents now. Behind them, all the parents who couldn't save them." I looked back and saw what he meant. Shadowy adult figures were materializing behind the children. Men in old-fashioned work clothes, women in long skirts and shawls. The parents who'd watched their children die one by one during that terrible flu outbreak, who'd been helpless to save them from the disease and the cold. "Mary Catherine," called one of the shadow women, "come to Mama, sweetheart. It's time to come home." But the little girl with the icicle hair shook her head, tears freezing on her cheeks as they fell. "We can't, Mama. We're too cold. We can't go anywhere when we're this cold." I reached the memorial stone and collapsed beside it, pulling Eddie down with me. My hands were so numb I could barely feel anything, but I started clawing at the snow, trying to uncover the complete inscription. The children had stopped following us. They stood in a circle about 10 feet away, watching with those terrible empty eyes. The shadow parents stood behind them, reaching out with arms that couldn't quite touch their lost children. "In memory of the 23 children lost to winter's cold," I read as I cleared the snow away. "December 1918, may they find peace in eternal summer." Eternal summer. The opposite of eternal winter. "Listen to me," I called to the children, my voice hoarse from the cold. "Your parents are here. They've been waiting for you. But you have to let go of the cold first." The little girl with the icicle hair tilted her head. "We don't know how. We've been cold for so long, we don't remember being warm." I thought about what I knew of hypothermia, of freezing to death. It was supposed to be peaceful at the end. People who died that way often talked about feeling warm right before they lost consciousness. Maybe that was the key. Remember summer, I told them. Remember playing in the sunshine. Remember your mother's warm kitchen. Remember what it felt like before the cold. For a moment, nothing changed. The children stared at me with those black hole eyes, and I could feel my own life force being drawn into their endless winter. Then the boy with the frosty hair smiled, really smiled, for the first time. I remember, he whispered. Mama's bread, fresh from the oven. It smelled like home. A tiny spark of warmth flickered around him, and the frost in his hair began to melt. And swimming in the creek, said another child. The water was so warm in July. One by one, they began to remember. Summer days and warm nights, hot meals and cozy fires. With each memory, the supernatural cold began to retreat, and I could see color returning to their pale faces. The shadow parents were stepping forward now, their own forms becoming more solid as the children remembered warmth. That's right, sweetheart, said the shadow woman to the little girl. Remember Mama's warm lap and the quilts Grandma made. The children were glowing now, not with cold light but with the warm golden light of summer sunshine. And as they glowed, they began to walk toward their waiting parents. Thank you, the little girl said to me as she passed. Thank you for helping us remember how to be warm. One by one, the children walked into their parents' arms, and one by one, they all faded into golden light that rose up into the snowy sky like warm breath on a cold morning. In seconds, they were gone, all of them. The supernatural cold vanished with them, leaving only the normal winter chill of a mountain blizzard. I could feel sensation returning to my hands and feet, could breathe without feeling like my lungs were freezing. Eddie opened his eyes and looked around in confusion. What happened? Where are the kids? They went home, I said. They finally went home. The official report listed it as severe exposure, complicated by altitude-induced hallucinations. Eddie spent 3 days in the hospital with frostbite on his hands and feet, and the doctors said we were lucky to be alive. The temperature had dropped to -40 that night, the worst December storm on record for the region. Funny thing about hallucinations, Eddie said when he was released from the hospital. They both had the same ones, don't usually work that way. But his memories of the encounter were already fading, the way trauma memories sometimes do. Within a week, he was telling people we'd found some old clothes in a cellar and gotten spooked by the wind. Within a month, he'd convinced himself that's all it really was. I never corrected him. Some truths are too heavy for people to carry. I went back to the settlement site 3 times over the next few months, always alone, always during daylight hours. The memorial stone was clearly visible now that I knew where to look, and I made sure the Park Service added it to the official historical registry. I also arranged for the site to be properly maintained, cleared of debris, marked with signs explaining its history. The reports of children's voices in the wilderness stopped completely after that December storm, but I made a point to check the memorial site every few months, just to be sure. To keep the snow cleared away from the stone, to make sure the inscription remained visible, to honor the 23 children who'd found their way home after 65 years of being lost in the cold. I retired from the Forest Service in 1998, after 37 years of protecting these mountains. On my last day, I hiked up to the old settlement one final time. The memorial stone was clean and clear, the inscription as sharp as the day it was carved. Someone had left flowers there, fresh wildflowers, even though it was November, and there shouldn't have been any flowers blooming anywhere on the mountain. But mountain laurel doesn't usually bloom in winter, neither do wild roses. I stood there for a long time, listening to the wind in the trees and thinking about parents who'd waited 65 years to hold their children again. Thinking about how love doesn't end just because life does. When I finally turned to leave, I could have sworn I heard something on the wind, not crying this time, and not calls for help. Just the distant sound of children laughing and playing in eternal summer sunshine. These days, I live in town at the base of the mountain, but sometimes, when the wind is just right and the weather turns cold, I still hear them. Happy voices carried on the winter air, reminding me that some stories have endings worth waiting for, no matter how long it takes. The settlement site is protected now, listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Tour groups sometimes visit during the summer months, and guides tell them about the old logging community and the influenza outbreak that ended it. But nobody talks about the children who used to call for help in the darkness. Nobody mentions the supernatural cold or the voices in the winter storms. That's fine with me. Some stories are meant to be remembered quietly by the people who were there. Some truths are too precious to share with folks who weren't there to earn them. The children are at peace now. After all these years, they're finally warm. And sometimes, on the coldest winter nights, that's enough. My name is Robert McLeod, but everyone calls me Bobby. I've been a park ranger in North Carolina's Pisgah National Forest for 14 years now. That's long enough to know every trail, every ridge, and every creature that calls these mountains home. At least, I thought I did. I'm 41 years old, and before I became a ranger, I spent 6 years in the Army as a combat tracker. They taught me to follow anything that moves, man or beast. After I got out, tracking wildlife felt like a natural fit. Bears, deer, wild boar, even the occasional cougar that wandered down from the north. In 14 years, I've never failed to identify an animal track. Never. My specialty is predator management around Grandfather Mountain, where the Blue Ridge Parkway cuts through some of the wildest country left in North Carolina. It's rough terrain, rocky outcrops, thick rhododendron thickets, and fog that rolls in so thick you can't see your own feet sometimes. The elevation up there stays above 5,000 feet. And in September, when this story takes place, the morning fog can last until noon. People always ask me about Bigfoot. Mountain folk around here have been telling stories about the Gray Man for 200 years. My own great-great-grandfather came over from Scotland in the 1800s, and he used to tell tales about something walking the ridges that wasn't quite human. The Cherokee had stories too, about the Kekle Kudla, the hairy giant. I always figured it was just bear stories. You know how it is. A black bear stands up on his hind legs, you see him through the fog at twilight, and suddenly he's 9 feet tall and walking like a man. Add some corn liquor to the mix, and you've got yourself a monster story. That was before September 15th, 1989. That was the day everything I thought I knew about these mountains got turned upside down. It started with a complaint from some hikers. A young couple from Charlotte said something had been following them for 3 days along the ridge trail. They described a gray giant that walked upright and stayed just out of sight in the fog. The thing never made any noise, they said, but they could feel it watching them. It threw rocks at us, the woman told me, her hands shaking as she filled out the incident report. Big rocks. But it wasn't trying to hit us. It was like it was hurting us, pushing us to move faster. Her boyfriend nodded. We found footprints, human-shaped but huge, way bigger than any person. I'd heard stories like this before. Every year, we'd get a few reports of mysterious figures in the woods. Usually, it turned out to be other hikers seen at a distance, or bears, or sometimes people's imagination getting the better of them in the fog. But these two seemed genuinely spooked. Did you take any pictures? I asked. They looked at each other. We tried, the man said. But every time we got our camera out, the fog would roll in thicker, like it knew. I've been doing this job long enough to know when people are telling the truth, even if what they're saying sounds impossible. These two weren't lying. They'd seen something up there that scared them bad enough to hike 15 miles in the dark to get to the nearest road. That night, I called Dr. Sarah Fleming at Appalachian State University. She's a wildlife biologist who helps us with animal behavior issues. Sarah's got more degrees than a thermometer, but she's practical too. If anyone could help me figure out what these hikers had encountered, it was her. Sounds like a bear to me, Sarah said over the phone. Black bears will sometimes follow humans for miles if they smell food. Septembers, when they're bulking up for winter. That's what I figured, I said. But these folks swore it was walking upright the whole time, never dropped to all fours. Sarah was quiet for a moment. That is unusual. Bears don't typically maintain bipedal locomotion for extended periods. It's inefficient for them. She agreed to come up the next morning to help me investigate. We'd hike the ridge trail where the couple had their encounter and see what we could find. I should have known right then that something was different about this case. In all my years as a ranger, I'd never had Dr. Fleming volunteer for a field investigation this quickly. Usually, it took weeks to get her out of her lab. But I was still thinking like a rational man. I was still sure there was a logical explanation for everything. I wish I'd been right. Sarah met me at the ranger station just after dawn. The fog was already rolling in thick, which was perfect for our investigation. If something was using the fog for cover, we'd find out today. We started our hike at the Blue Ridge Parkway overlook and headed north along the Ridge Trail. The elevation here stays above 5,200 feet, and the fog was so thick we could barely see 20 feet ahead. Our footsteps were muffled on the soft trail, and the only sounds were the drip of moisture from the trees and our quiet voices. "Tell me about the tracks they described," Sarah said as we walked. 18 inches long, human-shaped, about 6-foot stride length, I replied. That's what really got my attention. A 6-foot stride means whatever made them has to be at least 8 feet tall to walk comfortably. Could be a person in large boots? That's what I thought, until they told me about the rock throwing. These weren't pebbles. They described rocks the size of softballs being hurled with perfect accuracy from over 100 yards away. Sarah stopped walking. 100 yards? Through fog? That's what they said. We hiked for about an hour before I found what we were looking for. In a muddy section of trail, clear as day, was a footprint unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was massive, 18 inches long and nearly 8 inches wide at the ball of the foot. But it wasn't just the size that made my skin crawl. It was perfectly human-shaped, complete with 5 toes, but the proportions were all wrong. The heel was too wide, the arch too high, and the toes were longer and thicker than any human foot. "My God," Sarah whispered, dropping to her knees beside the print. She pulled out her measuring tape and camera. "Bobby, this is incredible." I knelt beside her, studying the track. The depth of the impression suggested something weighing at least 600 pounds. But here's what really bothered me. The track was clean. No claw marks, no signs of fur or hair between the toes like you'd see with a bear print. Just bare skin. "There are more over here," I called out, following a trail of prints that led off the main path into the rhododendron thicket. We followed the tracks for maybe 200 yards before they disappeared on a rocky outcrop. But it wasn't just that the tracks stopped. They stopped in the middle of solid granite, as if whatever made them had simply vanished. "This doesn't make sense," I muttered, studying the rock surface. There were no scratches, no scuff marks, nothing to indicate how something that heavy had gotten off the rock without leaving a trace. That's when Sarah grabbed my arm. "Bobby," she whispered. "Listen." I froze and listened. At first, I didn't hear anything unusual. Then, from somewhere in the fog behind us, came a sound I'll never forget. It was like wood breaking, but rhythmic. Crack, crack, crack. Each crack was followed by a dull thud, like something heavy hitting the ground. "Tree limbs," I said quietly. "Something's breaking tree limbs." We stood perfectly still, trying to pinpoint the direction of the sound. The fog made it impossible to tell exactly where it was coming from, but it seemed to be moving. The cracking would come from our left, then our right, then behind us again. "It's circling us," Sarah breathed. I pulled out my radio to call for backup, but all I got was static. We were in a dead zone, too far from any repeater to get a signal. I wasn't too worried yet. We were experienced hikers, and whatever was out there was keeping its distance. That's when the rock throwing started. The first one landed about 10 feet to our right with a heavy thud. It was a chunk of granite about the size of a baseball, thrown hard enough to embed itself in the soft earth. I spun around, trying to see where it came from, but the fog was too thick. "Warning shot," I said to Sarah, keeping my voice calm. Bears sometimes throw things when they feel threatened. The second rock was bigger, maybe twice the size of the first. It sailed over our heads and crashed into a tree trunk behind us with enough force to knock bark loose. This one definitely wasn't thrown by a bear. "We need to leave," Sarah said, and I could hear the fear creeping into her voice. "Now." I agreed. We turned to head back down the trail, but that's when we found the backpack. It was hanging from a tree branch about 30 feet above the trail. A bright blue hiking pack, the kind day hikers use. But here's the thing. There was no way it could have gotten up there naturally. The tree had no low branches, no way for a human to climb it. The pack was just hanging there like someone had placed it. "That's impossible," I said, staring up at it. Sarah was already pulling out her binoculars. "It's shredded," she reported, "like something with claws went through it. But there's no blood." Another rock sailed past us, bigger than the first two. This one would have split my skull if it had connected. Whatever was throwing them was getting closer and more aggressive. "Move," I ordered, and we started jogging down the trail. That's when I heard it for the first time, a sound that made every hair on my neck stand up. It started as a low rumble, like distant thunder, then rose to a howl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It wasn't quite human, but it wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard either. It was the sound of something intelligent, something angry, and something very, very large. The howl echoed off the rocky peaks around us, seeming to last forever before finally fading into the fog. Sarah and I didn't stop running until we reached the parking area. My hands were shaking as I unlocked my truck, and I could see that Sarah was pale as a ghost. "What the hell was that?" she asked as we drove back toward town. I didn't have an answer. For the first time in 14 years of tracking, I'd encountered something I couldn't identify or explain. Something that could throw rocks with deadly accuracy through thick fog, something that could place a backpack 30 feet up a tree, and something that could make a sound like nothing I'd ever heard before. But I knew one thing for certain: whatever was up on that ridge, it wasn't a bear. We spent the next 3 days analyzing everything we'd collected from the ridge. Sarah took the plaster casts of the footprints back to her lab, and I collected hair samples from branches along the trail where our mystery creature had passed. The results came back on Thursday, and they changed everything. "Bobby, you need to see this," Sarah said over the phone. Her voice was different, excited, almost breathless. "Can you come to the lab right away?" I drove the 40 minutes to Appalachian State in record time. Sarah met me at the door of the biology building, practically bouncing on her feet. "The DNA results are back," she said, leading me down a hallway lined with specimen jars. "Bobby, this is going to change everything we thought we knew about North American wildlife." She led me into her lab and pulled up a computer screen showing DNA analysis results. To me, it looked like a bunch of colored lines and numbers, but Sarah was studying it like it held the secrets of the universe. "The hair samples showed DNA from an unknown primate species," she said. "Not human, not any known ape species, but definitely in the hominid family. The closest match in our database is Gigantopithecus blacki, but that species went extinct 300,000 years ago." "What are you saying?" Sarah turned to face me, her eyes bright with excitement. "I'm saying there's a relict population of extinct hominids living in the Appalachian Mountains. Bobby, we've discovered Bigfoot." I should have been excited. This was the kind of discovery that makes careers, that gets you on National Geographic specials. But something about Sarah's enthusiasm bothered me. She was a scientist. She should have been more cautious, more skeptical. "We need more evidence," I said. "One hair sample and some tracks aren't enough." "You're right," Sarah agreed. "We need to go back up there. We need cameras, recording equipment, maybe even try to make contact." That last part made me nervous. "Contact?" "Sarah, this thing threw rocks at us. It might be dangerous." But Sarah was already planning our return trip. She talked about setting up camera blinds, about following the creature's movement patterns, about documenting its behavior. She'd gone from curious scientist to obsessed researcher in the span of 3 days. We went back up on Saturday morning, this time with a full kit of scientific equipment, trail cameras, audio recorders, night vision scopes, and enough camping gear to stay for several days if needed. The fog was lighter that morning, giving us better visibility. We made it about 2 miles up the ridge trail before we found the first sign that our creature was still active. A massive tree had been uprooted and placed across the trail like a roadblock. Not fallen, placed. The root ball was clean, like the tree had been pulled straight up out of the ground. "A black bear can't do that," I said, staring at the 6-foot diameter trunk. "Nothing can do that." Sarah was already taking pictures and measurements. "Look at this, Bobby." The tree was twisted as it was pulled up. "See the spiral pattern in the bark? Whatever did this has incredible strength and fine motor control." We climbed over the tree and continued up the trail. Every few hundred yards, we found new evidence of the creature's presence. Rocks stacked in impossible formations, tree branches broken at heights no bear could reach, and always, just at the edge of our hearing, the sound of something large moving parallel to our path. "It's following us," I said to Sarah during a rest stop. "Staying just out of sight, but definitely tracking our movement." Sarah nodded. "Intelligent behavior. It's curious about us, but maintaining a safe distance. This suggests advanced cognitive abilities." That afternoon, we set up 3 trail cameras at strategic points along the ridge. Each camera was mounted 12 feet high and designed to be triggered by movement. If our creature passed by during the night, we'd have photographic evidence. We made camp about a mile from the camera positions and settled in for the night. Sarah was still talking excitedly about our discovery, but I was feeling more and more uneasy. Something about this whole situation felt wrong, like we were being watched by something that understood exactly what we were doing. Around midnight, I was awakened by a sound I couldn't identify. It was like wood rubbing against wood, but rhythmic, almost musical. I crawled out of my tent and listened carefully. The sound was coming from the direction of our camera positions. I woke Sarah, and we grabbed our flashlights and night vision scope. The sound had stopped by the time we reached the first camera location, but what we found there made my blood run cold. The camera was gone. Not broken, not fallen, gone. The mounting bracket was still attached to the tree, but the camera had been removed so carefully that not a single wire was damaged. It was sitting on the ground 30 feet away, opened up like someone had been examining the electronics inside. "It knows what the camera does," Sarah whispered, staring at the disassembled equipment. "It understands our technology." The second camera was found in pieces, scattered across a wide area. But it was the third camera that really scared me. We found it intact, still mounted to the tree, but when we checked the memory card, there was only one image on it. The photo showed something standing directly in front of the camera, close enough that only part of its torso was visible. What we could see was covered in gray-brown hair, with skin underneath that looked almost human. But it was the size that took my breath away. The creature's chest filled the entire frame, suggesting something at least 9 feet tall. "My God," Sarah breathed, staring at the image on the camera's LCD screen. "Look at the muscle definition. The bone structure. Bobby, this is incredible." That's when we heard the howl. It came from somewhere above us on the ridge, long and mournful, but with an undertone that made my teeth ache. It was answered by another howl from the opposite direction, then another from behind us. "There's more than one," I said, my hand moving instinctively to the bear spray on my belt. The howls continued for several minutes, seeming to move in a circle around our position. It sounded like communication, like they were coordinating something. "We need to leave," I said. "Now." But Sarah was already packing up the camera equipment, her movements quick and excited. "Bobby, don't you see what this means? We're witnessing organized behavior from an unknown hominid species. This is the discovery of the century." I helped her gather the equipment, but my mind was on getting off that ridge as quickly as possible. The howls had stopped, but that somehow made me more nervous. Whatever was out there had gone silent, and in my experience, that's when predators are most dangerous. We hiked back to our campsite and packed everything as quickly as we could. The whole time, I had the feeling we were being watched from the darkness beyond our flashlight beams. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound made me jump. Just as we were shouldering our packs, Sarah grabbed my arm. "Bobby," she whispered. "Look, 200 yards up the slope from our campsite, partially hidden behind a large boulder, something was watching us. It was tall and gray in the moonlight, standing perfectly still like a statue. Even at that distance, I could see it was massive, easily 9 feet tall, and built like a professional wrestler. We stared at it for maybe 30 seconds before it simply melted back into the shadows. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, without making a sound. "Did you see how it moved?" Sarah asked, her voice full of wonder. "Like liquid. No human could disappear that quietly." I didn't answer. I was too busy trying to control the fear that was crawling up my spine. Whatever was living up on that ridge, it was smarter than any animal I'd ever encountered. It understood our technology, it could communicate with others of its kind, and it was definitely not afraid of us. The question was, what did it want? I should have known Sarah wouldn't let it go. For the next week, she called me every day with new theories, new plans for returning to the ridge. She'd become completely obsessed with what she was calling the grandfather mountain population. "Bobby, I've been researching historical accounts," she said during one of her calls. "There are reports going back to the Cherokee, then the Scottish settlers, then early loggers and hunters, all describing the same thing: large, gray, human-like creatures living on the highest ridges. Sarah, maybe we should contact the university administration or the National Park Service. This is bigger than just the two of us. No. Her response was sharp, almost angry. Not yet. We need more evidence first. Solid, undeniable proof. Bobby, I'm going back up there tomorrow. With or without you. That worried me more than anything. Sarah was a brilliant scientist, but she'd never been much of an outdoors woman. The thought of her going up on that ridge alone, especially with whatever was living up there, made my stomach clench with worry. I'll go with you, I said, but this is the last time. After tomorrow, we involve other people. We met at the trailhead just after sunrise on October 1st. The weather had turned colder, and there was frost on the ground at the higher elevations. Sarah had brought even more equipment this time. Professional-grade cameras, motion sensors, and something she called a parabolic microphone for recording distant sounds. I want to try something different today, she said as we hiked up the ridge trail. Instead of avoiding contact, I want to try to communicate. Communicate? Sarah, this isn't some gentle forest giant. This thing has been throwing rocks at people. Territorial display behavior, she said dismissively. Perfectly normal for an alpha male protecting his family group. But I think they're intelligent enough to understand non-threatening gestures. I didn't like the sound of that, but Sarah was determined. We hiked up to the area where we'd seen the creature watching us, and she began setting up what she called a contact station. Cameras positioned to record any interaction, the microphone aimed into the forest, and a cleared area where she planned to leave gifts. Gifts? Fruit, nuts, shiny objects. Things that might interest a highly intelligent primate. While Sarah arranged her scientific equipment, I did what I do best. I tracked. The creature signs were everywhere once you knew what to look for. Broken branches at impossible heights, rocks arranged in patterns that couldn't be natural, and tracks, lots of tracks, showing at least 3 different individuals. That's when I realized we weren't just dealing with one creature. We were looking at a family group, maybe even a small tribe. The tracks showed different sizes, including some that might belong to juveniles. Sarah, I called out, I think you need to see this. I'd found what looked like a shelter, a depression in the rocks partially covered by carefully arranged branches and bark. It was hidden from casual observation, but offered a perfect view of the main trail. Someone or something had been watching hikers pass by for years, maybe decades. Inside the shelter, I found things that made my skin crawl. Human items, a compass, a water bottle, a torn piece of clothing. Nothing recent, but clear evidence that these creatures had been interacting with people for a long time. Trophies, Sarah said, examining the items. Or maybe just curiosity. Primitive tool-making cultures often collect objects from more advanced societies. But it was what I found next that really scared me. Scratched into the rock wall of the shelter were marks that looked almost like writing. Not letters or symbols I recognized, but definitely purposeful marks, arranged in patterns. Sarah, we need to leave. Right now. Why? Bobby, this is exactly what I've been hoping to find. Evidence of culture, of intelligence, of... A rock the size of a softball slammed into the ground 3 feet from where Sarah was kneeling. We both spun around, but there was nothing to see except empty forest. Warning, I said, grabbing Sarah's arm. It doesn't want us here. Another rock, this one larger, crashed into a tree trunk next to us with enough force to split the bark. The message was clear. Leave now or face the consequences. But instead of retreating, Sarah stood up and called out into the forest. We're not here to hurt you, we just want to understand. The response was immediate and terrifying. A howl erupted from somewhere close by, but it was unlike the ones we'd heard before. This one was full of rage, a sound that seemed to come from something barely in control of its fury. Then it stepped out of the trees. 9.5 feet tall, covered in gray-brown hair, built like a mountain of muscle and bone. Its face was almost human, but not quite. The brow ridge too pronounced, the jaw too heavy, the eyes too intelligent for any animal. It stood perfectly upright, balanced and controlled, studying us with an expression I can only describe as contempt. Magnificent, Sarah whispered, raising her camera. The creature's eyes fixed on the camera, and its expression changed from contempt to pure rage. It opened its mouth and let out another howl, this one so loud and deep that I felt it in my chest like a physical blow. Don't move, I whispered to Sarah, but she was already stepping forward, camera still raised. It's okay, she called out to the creature. We're friends. We just want to learn about you. The creature took a step toward us, and I could smell it now, a wild, musky odor that made my nose burn. Its hands were easily twice the size of a human's, with fingers that could probably crush bones without effort. Sarah, step back. Slowly. But Sarah was in full scientist mode now, completely focused on the creature. Look at the muscle definition, she said, still taking pictures. The adaptive features for high-altitude living. Bobby, this is the most important discovery in modern anthropology. That's when two more creatures emerged from the trees behind the first one. Smaller, but still massive by human standards. A family group, just like Sarah had predicted. The alpha male, because that's clearly what the first one was, looked back at the others, then at us. Some kind of communication passed between them, something I couldn't understand, but that made the hair on my neck stand up. Sarah, we need to go, now. Just a few more pictures, she said, but her voice was starting to shake. Even she was beginning to realize how much danger we were in. The alpha male took another step forward, and I could see its eyes clearly now. They were brown, almost human, but with an intelligence that was alien and cold. It was studying us, deciding something. That's when I remembered the stories my great-great-grandfather used to tell about the gray man of the ridges, and how the old Highlanders had learned to avoid certain areas, certain times of year. How they'd left offerings on the high peaks and stayed away during the mating season. Offerings, I whispered. I slowly reached into my pack and pulled out my lunch, sandwiches, fruit, and a thermos of coffee. Moving as carefully as I could, I set them on the ground between us and the creature, then stepped back. The alpha male looked at the food, then at me. For a moment, something almost like understanding passed between us. Then Sarah's camera flash went off. The creature's reaction was explosive. It roared again, but this time the sound was pure fury. It grabbed a dead tree trunk, easily 200 pounds of wood, and hurled it at us like a spear. I tackled Sarah and rolled us both behind a boulder, just as the tree crashed into the spot where we'd been standing. The impact was so violent it shook the ground. Run, I gasped, pulling Sarah to her feet. We ran down that ridge trail faster than I've ever moved in my life, with the sounds of pursuit crashing through the forest behind us. Trees breaking, rocks being hurled, and over it all, the sound of something massive moving through the undergrowth with terrifying speed. We didn't stop running until we reached my truck, and even then, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, staring at her camera's LCD screen, completely silent. Sarah, are you okay? She looked at me, with eyes that seemed to be seeing something far away. Bobby, she said in a voice barely above a whisper. Did you see how it looked at us? It wasn't just intelligent, it was judging us, like it was deciding whether we deserved to live. I started the truck and drove away from that ridge as fast as the winding mountain roads would allow. Behind us, I could swear I heard one last howl echoing off the peaks, not angry this time, but somehow satisfied, like it had made its point. Sarah never published her research. When we got back to the university that evening, she locked herself in her lab and spent the next 6 hours going through every photo, every audio recording, every piece of evidence we'd collected. I sat in the hallway outside, drinking coffee from vending machines and trying to process what we'd seen. Around midnight, Sarah finally emerged. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in one night. Bobby, she said quietly, I'm deleting everything. What, Sarah, you can't. This is the discovery of a lifetime. She shook her head slowly. No, this is their secret, and it should stay that way. They've been sharing these mountains with us for thousands of years, and they've managed to stay hidden for a reason. Who are we to change that? I wanted to argue with her, but when I looked into her eyes, I saw something that stopped me cold. Fear. Not just of what we'd encountered, but of what would happen if the world knew the truth. Think about it, Bobby. What happens when this gets out? The media circus, the government, scientists, the hunters and thrill seekers, these mountains would be overrun with people trying to capture or kill them. Their whole way of life would be destroyed. She had a point. I'd seen what happened when rare animals were discovered in protected areas. The attention never helped the animals. It usually made things worse for them. So what do? We file a report about bears exhibiting unusual behavior in the high elevation areas. We recommend temporary trail closures during their active season. And we keep their secret. The official report I filed with the Park Service described an aggressive black bear displaying territorial behavior above 5,000 feet elevation. I recommended seasonal closures of certain ridge trails and do 5 increased bear safety protocols for hikers. The recommendations were accepted without question. Dr. Sarah Fleming left Appalachian State 2 weeks later. She took a job with the Wildlife Conservation Society, working to protect endangered species in remote parts of the world. We still exchange Christmas cards, but we've never talked about what happened on Grandfather Mountain. The ridge trails were quietly closed for 3 months, ostensibly for bear management activities. When they reopened, new signs were posted, warning hikers about aggressive wildlife and recommending that people avoid the area during early morning and evening hours. I went back to my regular ranger duties, but I requested a transfer to the lower elevation areas. Officially, it was for personal reasons. Unofficially, it was because I knew I couldn't handle another encounter with the gray man. But I still patrol the area sometimes, just to keep an eye on things. The trail cameras we set up are long gone, removed by someone or something with human-level intelligence and a clear understanding of what they were for. Hikers still report strange sounds and fleeting glimpses of large figures in the fog, but these reports are quietly filed away and forgotten. There's an understanding now, unspoken but real. We stay on the main trails, we don't venture into the highest elevations during their active times, and we respect the signs that say certain areas are closed for wildlife management. In return, they stay hidden and leave us alone. The Cherokee were right. The Scottish settlers were right. My great-great-grandfather was right. There are things in these mountains that are older than our civilization, that have found ways to live alongside us without us ever knowing they're there. They're not monsters. They're not myths. They're just another species trying to survive in a world that's getting smaller every year. And maybe, if we're smart and respectful, we can all continue to share these mountains in peace. Sometimes, on foggy mornings, when I'm driving the Blue Ridge Parkway, I'll catch a glimpse of something gray moving through the trees high above. Something that walks upright and watches the road with intelligent eyes. When that happens, I just nod slightly and keep driving. It's a small gesture, but I think they understand. Live and let live. Stay in your territory, and we'll stay in ours. The mountains are big enough for all of us, but every now and then, when the fog rolls thick across the ridges and the wind carries sounds that don't quite belong to any animal I know, I remember that we're not alone up here. And maybe that's exactly the way it should be. The ridge runners are still out there, watching, waiting, protecting their ancient secrets. And as long as we show them the respect they deserve, I think they'll let us keep walking through their domain. After all, they were here first. My name is Michael O'Brien, but everyone calls me Mick. I've been a park ranger for 20 years now, watching over the George Washington National Forest in Virginia. Most of that time, I've spent my summers alone in fire towers, looking for smoke on the horizon. People think it's lonely work, but I like the quiet. Up there, it's just me, my radio, and miles of green mountains stretching in every direction. My job is simple: spot fires before they get big, call them in, and help coordinate the crews who put them out. I'm 46 years old, and I know these mountains better than I know my own reflection. I can tell you where lightning will strike just by watching the clouds. I can smell a campfire from 3 miles away. And I can look at smoke and tell you exactly what's burning pine, oak, or someone's illegal trash pile. Before I became a ranger, I was a volunteer firefighter back in my hometown. That's where I learned about fire, how it moves, how it thinks, how it kills. My younger brother Danny died in a warehouse fire when I was 23. The flames trapped him on the 3rd floor. After that, I made it my life's work to understand fire, to predict it, to stop it before it could hurt anyone else. I grew up Irish Catholic. My mom made sure we went to church every Sunday, said our prayers every night, and kept a rosary in our pockets. After Danny died, I stopped all that. If God was real, why would he let my brother burn? But Mom's voice stayed in my head. Evil is real, Michael, she used to say. The devil walks the earth, looking for souls to steal. I never believed her. In 20 years of watching these mountains, I'd heard every superstition and ghost story. Hikers claimed they saw shadowy figures. Old-timers talked about Civil War ghosts. Local kids swore the devil himself lived up on Massanutten Mountain. I always had the same answer. Show me proof. Every strange fire had a cause: lightning, careless campers, or arsonists. Every weird sound was an animal or the wind. Every shadow was just a tree or a rock formation playing tricks in the sunset. That was July 1995, the hottest, driest summer Virginia had seen in 50 years. The whole state was a tinderbox waiting for a match. We'd had fire warnings for 6 straight weeks. No campfires allowed, no fireworks, no smoking in the woods. I was assigned to Tower 17 on the Massanutten Mountain Ridge for a 10-day shift. It's the highest point in that section of the forest, just me, a tiny cabin, and a glass observation room at the top of a 70-foot steel tower. The ridge is an ugly place. Most of the forest is beautiful: tall oaks, cool streams, soft moss. But up on Massanutten, everything looks sick. The pines are stunted and twisted. The rocks jut out of the ground like broken bones. Lightning has killed so many trees that whole sections look like a graveyard of blackened trunks. The old-timers say it's cursed. During the Civil War, deserters from both armies hid up there. Some of them went crazy from hunger and fear. Others just disappeared. The few who made it down told stories about meeting the devil himself on that ridge, about bargains made in blood to survive. I thought it was nonsense, just scared men seeing things in the dark. I climbed up to the tower on July 15th, hauling my supplies: food, water, books, batteries for my radio and weather instruments. The temperature was already 95 degrees, and it wasn't even noon. From the top, I could see 30 miles in every direction. The valley shimmered in the heat. No clouds, no wind, just brutal, pressing heat that made the air thick enough to chew. That first night, I couldn't sleep. It was too hot. Even with all the windows open, the cabin felt like an oven. Around midnight, I gave up and climbed to the observation deck. The stars were so bright they hurt to look at. No moon, just darkness and starlight and the endless ridges rolling away below me. That's when I smelled it for the first time: sulfur. Not the rotten egg smell of a septic tank. This was different: hot metal and burning stone, like someone striking a match against granite. I checked my instruments. No volcanic activity in Virginia. No gas leaks possible up here. No industrial plants within 100 miles. The smell faded after a few minutes. I figured it was my imagination, or maybe some weird chemical reaction in the rocks caused by the heat. I should have known better. The lightning started on day 3. I woke up at dawn to a sky that looked wrong. The clouds were too dark, too low, and they moved in ways clouds shouldn't move, swirling in circles, dropping down like fingers reaching for the ground. My weather radio crackled to life. Tower 17, this is Central. We're showing a severe thunderstorm cell moving into your sector. High winds, heavy lightning activity. Stay inside and off the tower. Copy that, Central, I said, watching the storm roll toward me like a black wall. The first lightning bolt hit a pine tree half a mile away. I saw the flash, counted the seconds: 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, and heard the thunder crack like a gunshot. Fire bloomed where the tree stood. Orange flames climbed up the trunk, catching on the dry needles. I grabbed my radio. Central, this is Tower 17, lightning strike, Sector 4, grid reference Baker 7, single tree, fire spreading to ground cover. Copy, 17, dispatching suppression crew. More lightning. Strike after strike, so fast I couldn't count them. Each bolt hit a different tree, and each tree caught fire instantly. Within 10 minutes, I had 5 separate fires burning in my sector. Central, this is 17. Multiple strikes, multiple fires. I need all available crews. The radio hissed static. Then a voice I didn't recognize came through, deep and wrong, speaking words that sounded like Latin. Central, I said, say again, you're breaking up. More static. Then the normal dispatcher came back. 17, say again. We didn't copy your last. I reported the fires again. They sent 3 crews. But as I watched through my binoculars, something strange happened. The fires weren't spreading the way fire should spread. Fire follows fuel, wind, and gravity. It burns uphill because heat rises, but it needs wind or fuel to move. These fires were burning upward against the wind. They were climbing rock faces where there was nothing to burn. They were moving in straight lines, like someone was painting them across the mountain. I called it in. Central, we've got unusual fire behavior. Flames moving against wind direction. Possible atmospheric conditions causing updrafts. Copy, 17. Crews are on scene. They'll assess and advise. I watched through the binoculars as the first crew reached the nearest fire. 6 firefighters in yellow, Nomex suits and hard hats, hauling hoses and pumps. The crew boss radioed in. Tower 17, this is Ground Crew Alpha. We're at the Baker 7 fire. Something's weird here. The fire's burning in a pattern. Looks almost like footprints. Say again, Alpha? The burn pattern, Mick. It looks like something walked through here. Big footprints, maybe 7 or 8 feet apart. And they're burned into solid rock. I felt something cold slide down my spine despite the heat. Alpha, fire doesn't burn rock. I know that, Mick. I'm looking at it right now. These aren't scorch marks. The rock is melted. Like someone walked through here, with feet hot enough to liquefy stone. I didn't know what to say. There had to be an explanation. Lightning can create fulgurites, tubes of melted sand where bolts hit the ground. Maybe that's what they were seeing. Document it with photos, I said. We'll figure it out after the fires are contained. Copy that. The crews worked all day. By evening, they had 4 of the 5 fires under control. But the 5th one, the one on the exposed ridge near the old Civil War trail, kept burning. Every time they thought they had it, it would flare up again in a new spot. The crew boss radioed me at sunset. 17, Alpha. We're pulling back for the night. This fire isn't behaving right. It keeps jumping our fire line. Tomorrow we'll bring in air support. Copy, Alpha. Stay safe. I watched the fire through the darkness. It glowed orange against the black sky, pulsing like a heartbeat. That night, the temperature dropped. Not much, maybe 10 degrees, but enough that I could finally breathe. I was eating dinner in the cabin when my radio crackled. Mick, can you help? It was barely a whisper, full of static. This is Tower 17. Who's calling? So hot, burning, please. Identify yourself. What's your location? Devils, backbone, he's here. Oh God, The radio went dead. I tried every channel, nothing but static. I tried the emergency frequency. Silence. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my flashlight and went outside. The night air smelled like smoke and that same sulfur smell from before. Stronger now. So strong it made my eyes water. Then I saw it. Down on the ridge where the fire burned, a figure stood in the flames. It was too far away to see clearly, but I could make out the shape tall, man-like, but wrong. Too tall. The proportions weren't right. And it stood in the middle of the fire like the flames were cool water. I grabbed my binoculars. Through the lenses, I saw it clearly. A humanoid shape, at least 7 feet tall, with skin that looked like burned leather. It had no face I could recognize, just shadows where eyes should be, and something that might have been horns curving back from its skull. And it was looking at me. Even across the distance, even through the darkness and smoke, I felt its eyes on me. Cold eyes that saw right through my skin to something deeper. Then it smiled. I stumbled backward, dropping the binoculars. When I looked again with my naked eyes, the figure was gone. But the fire had spread. It now burned in a shape I recognized from my Catholic childhood, from the books my mother made me study. A pentagram. The fire was burning in a perfect 5-pointed star on the mountainside. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the observation deck with every light on, watching the star-shaped fire burn below. It didn't spread beyond its pattern. It just burned and burned, feeding on nothing I could see. At dawn, 3 helicopters arrived carrying water buckets. I watched them dump thousands of gallons on the fire. The flames hissed and steamed, but they didn't go out. Within an hour of the helicopters leaving, the fire was burning again, exactly as bright as before. The incident commander called me on the radio. Tower 17, this is Icy Garcia. We need you to hike down and assess the fire up close. Something's interfering with our normal suppression methods. You want me to go into that? I said, staring at the star burning on the ridge. You're our best fire behavior analyst, Mick. If anyone can figure this out, it's you. Take a radio and a GPS. Document everything. We need to understand what we're dealing with. I didn't want to go. Every instinct screamed at me to stay in the tower, lock the door, and wait for this nightmare to end. But I'd spent 20 years training for situations like this. I was the expert. I had to go. I packed my gear, fire shelter, GPS, camera, extra batteries, water, and the old rosary my mother gave me. I hadn't carried it in years, but something made me slip it into my pocket. The hike down took an hour. As I got closer to the fire, the temperature climbed. By the time I reached the ridge, it was over 120 degrees. The air was so hot it hurt to breathe. The fire burned in a perfect circle around the star pattern. Inside the circle, the ground was black and melted. Rocks had liquefied and resolidified into strange shapes. Trees were reduced to ash, but the ash hadn't blown away. It stood in perfect tree shapes, like gray ghosts. And everywhere, those footprints. They were burned into solid stone, each one 8 feet from the last. I measured them. Each print was 3 feet long and shaped like a cloven hoof. I took photos, I collected samples of the melted rock, I documented everything, trying to think like a scientist, not like a terrified human being. That's when I found the crew member. His name was Rodriguez. I'd known him for 5 years, good kid, 24 years old, studying forestry at Virginia Tech. He'd been with Ground Crew Alpha. He was kneeling in the center of the pentagram, hands clasped like he was praying. His skin was gray. His eyes were open but empty. He wasn't burned. That was the worst part. The fire had consumed everything around him, melted solid rock. But his clothes and skin were untouched. I checked for a pulse. Nothing. He was cold despite the heat. I grabbed my radio with shaking hands. "I see Garcia. This is O'Brien. I've found Rodriguez from Alpha Crew. He's dead. No signs of burns or trauma. Just dead." "Copy that, Mick. We're sending a recovery team. Get out of there now." I turned to leave. That's when I heard the voice. It came from everywhere and nowhere, from the ground, from the fire, from inside my own skull. Asterisk, asterisk, Michael O'Brien. Asterisk, asterisk. It knew my name. Asterisk, asterisk, 20 years you've watched. 20 years you've denied me. No more. Asterisk, asterisk. "Who are you?" I whispered. Asterisk, asterisk. "I am the fire that does not consume. I am the angel who fell to earth on wings of flame. I am bound to this mountain by blood spilled in war, and I grow stronger with each soul I claim." Asterisk, asterisk. The air shimmered. The figure I'd seen the night before materialized in front of me, stepping out of the flames like they were a doorway. Up close, it was worse than I'd imagined. Its skin was the color of old leather, cracked and smoking. Its eyes were pits of red light. The horns were real black and curved, growing from a skull that was too long, too sharp. Asterisk, asterisk, your brother burned. Asterisk, asterisk, it said. Asterisk, asterisk, Danny. I felt his soul scream as the flames took him. Such exquisite pain. Asterisk, asterisk. "Shut up," I said, backing away. "You don't know anything about my brother." Asterisk, asterisk, I know everything about fire, Michael. I am fire. I am the light that burns in hell, and this mountain is mine. Asterisk, asterisk. It stepped toward me. Where its hooves touched the ground, the stone melted. I did the only thing I could think of. I pulled out my mother's rosary and held it up. Asterisk, asterisk, back off. Asterisk, asterisk, I said. "In the name of God, leave this place." It laughed. The sound was like trees splitting in a forest fire. Asterisk, asterisk, your God abandoned me long ago. Why would he answer you? Asterisk, asterisk. But it stopped walking. The rosary's silver cross caught the sunlight, and where the light touched the creature, its skin smoked. Asterisk, asterisk, you cannot destroy me. Asterisk, asterisk, it said. Asterisk, asterisk, I am bound here, but I am eternal. One day you will die, Michael O'Brien, and I will still be here, feeding on the souls who dare walk my mountain. Asterisk, asterisk. If you're so powerful, I said, my voice shaking, why are you trapped here? Its eyes flared brighter. Asterisk, asterisk, the blood of 1,000 soldiers soaked this ground. Their dying prayers created a cage I cannot break. But I can reach beyond these ridges now. The drought has made everything dry, everything ready to burn. I will spread my fire across these mountains, and with each soul I take, my prison weakens. Asterisk, asterisk. It raised one hand. The fire around us surged higher, forming a wall. The heat was unbearable. My skin felt like it was peeling. Asterisk, asterisk. Goodbye, Ranger. Thank you for the company. Asterisk, asterisk. I ran. The fire chased me, moving faster than any natural fire could move. It jumped from tree to tree, cutting off my escape routes. I could hear that terrible laughter behind me. I prayed. For the first time in 20 years, I prayed. Not the formal prayers my mother taught me, but desperate, gasping pleas. Please, God, please. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I stopped believing. Please don't let me die like Danny. Please. I burst out of the fire line into a cleared area. Behind me, the flames hit an invisible barrier and stopped, piling up like water against glass. I didn't stop running until I reached the base of my tower. Only then did I turn and look back. The fire still burned in its star pattern, but the figure was gone. In its place, written in flames across the mountainside, were words in Latin. I took a photo. Later, a priest would translate them for me. Until we meet in flame. The incident commander ordered a full evacuation of all personnel from Massanutten Mountain. Fire crews pulled back. Helicopters stopped flying. They were going to let it burn. But I knew it wouldn't just burn out. That thing, that fallen angel, that demon, whatever it was, would keep spreading its fire. It would reach the valley towns. Hundreds of people would die. I hiked back up to Tower 17. I.C. Garcia tried to stop me over the radio. Mick, you're ordered to evacuate. That fire is unstable. That fire is going to kill people, I said. I'm going to stop it. How? We've tried everything. Water doesn't work. Fire retardant doesn't work. It's burning in defiance of physics. I know, I said. That's because it's not a normal fire. I didn't tell him what I'd seen. He wouldn't have believed me. Hell, I barely believed it myself. Back in the tower, I searched through the books I'd brought, fire behavior manuals, forest histories, local folklore collections. In one old book about Civil War deserters, I found a passage. Asterisk. The men spoke of a devil on the mountain, a burning creature that offered them survival in exchange for their souls. Those who refused were found dead with no marks upon them. Those who accepted were never seen again. Asterisk. The book was dated 1863. The author was a Confederate chaplain who'd interviewed the deserters. On the next page was a hand-drawn symbol, a 5-pointed star surrounded by Latin text. Below it, a note. Protection against the fire devil. Must be drawn with blessed water and renewed each day. I had holy water. Not much, just a small vial my mother had given me years ago, blessed by our family priest. I'd kept it more out of sentimentality than faith. Now it might be the only thing that could save me. As the sun set, the fire on the ridge blazed brighter. It had grown beyond the pentagram, spreading in spiral patterns that made no sense. I could see the figure walking through it, growing larger with each passing hour. It was feeding on the fire, getting stronger. At midnight, it appeared at the base of my tower. I saw it through the observation deck, windows 7 feet tall, horns scraping the steel beams as it climbed the ladder. I grabbed the holy water and drew the protective symbol on the floor. The walls, the ceiling. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the vial. The ladder creaked. It was climbing up. Asterisk, asterisk, Michael. Asterisk, asterisk, its voice boomed. Asterisk, asterisk, let me in. We have unfinished business. Asterisk, asterisk. You can't come in here, I shouted. This tower is protected. Asterisk, asterisk. Protected by what? Your fear? Your doubt? You don't even believe in the God who blessed that water. Asterisk, asterisk. It was right. I didn't believe. Not really. I was going through the motions, trying to remember my mother's prayers. The door handle turned. I grabbed my mother's rosary and held it tight. God, I whispered. I don't know if you're real. I don't know if you care, but my mom believed. Danny believed. If you're there, help me. The door flew open. The creature filled the doorway, too large for the frame. It had to duck to fit inside. Its skin glowed with internal fire. Asterisk, asterisk. Last chance, Michael. Join me. Serve me. I will make you powerful beyond imagination. You'll never feel pain, never know death. Never asterisk, asterisk. No, I said. It smiled, that terrible smile. Asterisk, asterisk, then burn. Asterisk, asterisk. It reached for me. Its hand was like a furnace. I threw the remaining holy water directly at its face. The creature screamed. Not a human scream, a sound like metal tearing, like forests dying, like 1,000 voices crying out in agony. Steam erupted where the water hit its skin. The flesh bubbled and peeled back, revealing something underneath that hurt to look at. Pure light. Twisted and corrupted. Asterisk, asterisk, what have you done? Asterisk, asterisk, it shrieked. I remembered, I said. Faith isn't about knowing. It's about hoping. About trusting. My mom had faith. Danny had faith. And maybe that's enough. And I have, see you. The protective symbols I'd drawn began to glow. Not bright, just a soft silver light, like moonlight on water. The creature stumbled backward, hitting the door frame. Where its skin touched my symbols, it burned. Asterisk, asterisk, this isn't over. Asterisk, asterisk, it hissed. Asterisk, asterisk, I am bound here. I will wait. I will always wait. Asterisk, asterisk. It fell backward off the tower. I ran to the window and watched it plummet 70 feet to the ground. It landed in a crouch, unhurt. Then it turned and walked into the fire. The moment it disappeared, every fire on the mountain went out, just stopped burning. 1 second there were walls of flame. The next there was nothing but smoke and darkness. It started to rain. Heavy, drenching rain that hadn't been in any weather forecast. The drought broke that night. The official report blamed the unusual fire behavior on rare atmospheric conditions caused by the drought. Temperature inversions, pressure differentials, complicated scientific terms that explain nothing. Rodriguez's death was listed as heat stroke. The melted rock and hoof prints were classified as fulgurites and natural erosion. The pentagram pattern was coincidental, burning in a dry fuel bed. Nobody wanted to know the truth. Truth was too frightening. They gave me 2 weeks off. Trauma leave, they called it. When I came back, they transferred me to a different section of the forest. Nobody said why, but I understood. Massanutten Mountain was off limits to me now. I went to church the Sunday after the fire. The first time in 23 years, I sat in the back pew and cried through the entire service. The priest found me afterward. His name was Father Murphy, and he'd known my mother. I heard about what happened, he said quietly, on the mountain. The official report says, I know what the official report says. I also know what you saw. There are places in this world where evil has taken root, places consecrated by blood and death. The devil doesn't need an invitation to those places. He's already there. Is it gone? I asked. Father Murphy shook his head, bound, weakened, but not gone. It will wait. Michael, it's patient. Evil always is. He gave me a new rosary, blessed with oil from Rome. I've carried it every day since. I still work as a park ranger, but I won't go near Massanutten Mountain. Sometimes, on dry summer nights, when lightning flashes in the distance, I can smell that sulfur smell, and I know it's still there, waiting. Other rangers have reported strange things. Fires that burn in patterns, hoofprints in stone, voices on the radio speaking in languages nobody understands. The Forest Service investigates, finds nothing, and closes the cases. Life goes on. But I know the truth. I've seen it, I've felt its heat, I've looked into its eyes. The devil walks these mountains. He's bound by old prayers and old blood, but he's patient. He's been waiting for centuries. He can wait centuries more. And one day, someone will break that binding. Someone will set him free. I pray it's not in my lifetime. I pray for a lot of things now. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder about Rodriguez. What did he see in those last moments? What made him kneel and pray? Did he feel anything when his soul left his body? And I wonder about Danny. My brother, burning in that warehouse. Did something darker than simple fire take him? Was the creature on the mountain telling the truth? I'll never know. What I do know is this. Evil is real. It walks the earth. It waits in dark places. And sometimes, no matter how much we know about fire, about science, about the natural world, sometimes the supernatural breaks through. I go up in fire towers still. I watch for smoke. I call in strikes. I coordinate crews. But I also carry holy water now. I pray every night. And I never, ever go near Massanutten Mountain. Because the devil's still there, on his backbone of stone and ash, waiting. My name is Patricia Silverman, but everyone calls me Patty. I've been a park ranger here in the Cherokee National Forest for 16 years now. Most people think rangers just walk trails and tell tourists not to feed the bears. That's part of it, sure, but my real job is cultural resource management. I study the old Cherokee sites scattered through these Tennessee mountains, trying to understand how the tribes used the land centuries ago. I have a PhD in anthropology from the University of Tennessee. Spent 8 years learning Cherokee language and culture before I ever set foot on this job. The tribal elders respect me because I listen more than I talk. That matters here in the Unicoi Mountains, where every rock pile and creek bend has a story. My specialty is acoustic research. Sounds boring, right? Actually, it's fascinating. These mountains are full of natural sound phenomena, wind caves that whistle like flutes, stone formations that echo voices for miles, rock chambers that amplify whispers into booming calls. For 16 years, I've studied every weird noise these hills can make. The Cherokee called this area the Speaking Stones, long before any white settlers arrived. Local legends say the rocks themselves could talk to people. Tribal historians told me stories about ancestors receiving guidance from stone voices during important decisions. I always smiled and nodded politely. In my experience, every supernatural sound had a perfectly logical acoustic explanation. That was before June 1996. Before the summer solstice, before I learned that some Cherokee stories aren't legends at all. The weather that week was strange, even for Tennessee. Heat lightning flickered across the sky every night without any rain. The air felt thick and electric, like the mountains themselves were holding their breath. Animals acted nervous. Birds stopped singing during the day. Deer gathered in unusual groups along the ridgelines, watching the valleys below with alert ears. I was stationed at Research Point 7, an old quarry site about 20 miles from the Cherokee Reservation. The quarry had been abandoned since the 1942, leaving behind a natural stone amphitheater carved into the mountainside. Perfect acoustics. The Cherokee had used this spot for ceremonies long before anyone started digging rock for road construction. My equipment was simple but effective. Digital recording devices, seismic sensors, frequency analyzers, weather monitoring stations. I'd been documenting natural sound patterns here for 3 months, building a database of normal acoustic activity. The goal was to separate natural phenomena from cultural interpretations. The stones themselves were remarkable. Limestone and sandstone formations created by millions of years of water flow. Some stood 20 feet tall, arranged in rough circles like ancient monuments. Others formed caves and chambers that channeled sound in impossible ways. Speak softly at one end, and your voice emerged clearly from stones 50 yards away. On June 20th, I noticed the first anomaly. I was calibrating my recording equipment around sunset when I heard it. A low humming sound, barely audible, like a bass note played on a massive organ. It seemed to come from the stones themselves, vibrating through the rock formations and into the ground beneath my feet. I checked my instruments. The seismic sensors showed minor vibrations, but nothing that would explain the sound. Wind readings were nearly zero. No aircraft overhead. No machinery anywhere within miles. Yet the humming continued for nearly an hour before fading away as darkness fell. I made detailed notes in my research log. Possible explanations: underground water flow, thermal expansion in the rocks, distant industrial noise carried by atmospheric conditions. All seemed unlikely, but I needed more data before drawing conclusions. The next morning brought another surprise. My equipment had recorded the humming clearly. More than that, the sound showed perfect harmonic structure, mathematical precision that natural phenomena don't usually display. The frequencies formed chord progressions, like music composed by some invisible force. I spent the day examining every piece of equipment. No malfunctions, no interference from radio signals or power lines. The recordings were clean and clear. The stones had definitely produced organized harmonic sounds for over an hour. That's when I called Joseph Swimmer. Joseph was a Cherokee elder in his 70s. Tribal historian, medicine man, and one of the few people who still spoke the old language fluently. We'd worked together on several archaeological projects. He knew these mountains better than anyone alive. "Patty," he said when I explained the recordings over the radio. His voice sounded tired. "You need to be very careful up there, especially during the solstice." "Why? What's special about the solstice?" Long pause. Static crackled through the radio silence. "The ancestors are restless," he said finally. They've been quiet for many years. If they're starting to speak again, it means something important is coming. I respected Joseph, but his explanation didn't help my research. I needed scientific data, not folklore. Still, his warning stuck with me as I prepared for another night of monitoring. The solstice was tomorrow. If the stones were going to do something unusual, it would probably happen then. I set up additional recording equipment around the amphitheater, placed sensors on the largest stone formations, checked battery levels twice. Whatever was making these sounds, I was going to document it properly. As the sun set on June 21st, the longest day of the year, I had no idea that my 16 years of rational, scientific thinking were about to change forever. The humming started again at exactly 9:47 p.m. I know the time because I was watching my equipment displays when every sensor began registering activity simultaneously. But this wasn't the gentle bass note from the previous evening. This was complex, layered, multiple tones weaving together like a choir warming up before a concert. I grabbed my headphones and listened to the live audio feed. The sound was coming from at least a dozen different stone formations, each contributing its own frequency to an increasingly complex harmony. My frequency analyzer showed the impossible. Every tone was mathematically related to the others. Perfect fifths, octave intervals, harmonic series that would make a symphony orchestra jealous. No natural phenomenon could create this level of organization. I checked my instruments 3 times. Everything was working correctly. The stones were definitely producing organized harmonic music, not random sounds, not wind effects, not underground water. Music. The hair on my arms stood up, and not from the electric air. For the first time in 16 years, I was witnessing something that my scientific training couldn't explain. The harmonies shifted, becoming more complex. New voices joined the choir. The sound filled the entire amphitheater, resonating off the limestone walls and creating layered echoes that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I felt the vibrations in my chest, my bones, the metal equipment around me. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. Patterns, rhythm, structure. The stones weren't just making music, they were making language. I'd spent 8 years learning Cherokee linguistic patterns. The old language has a musical quality, with rising and falling tones that carry meaning. What I was hearing through my headphones sounded like Cherokee, spoken by voices made of stone and wind. I couldn't understand the words, but I recognized the language structure. Subject, object, verb patterns. Tonal inflections. Grammatical markers that indicated past events, spiritual concepts, and ceremonial importance. The stones were speaking Cherokee. My hands shook as I made notes. This was impossible. Rocks don't speak languages. Acoustic phenomena don't form grammatical structures. Yet my equipment was recording clear evidence of organized communication coming from ancient stone formations. The voices grew stronger. What had started as whispers became clear speech. I could make out individual words now. Tsalagi, the Cherokee word for their own people. Nevai, earth. Galvladi, sacred. More voices joined the conversation. Young voices and old ones. Male and female tones, all speaking in harmonious overlap, like a congregation reciting prayers together. The acoustic effect was overwhelming. Sound seemed to come from inside the stones themselves, as if the rocks had become hollow vessels for invisible speakers. I tried to stay rational, focused on data collection, kept my instruments running and my notes detailed. But rational thinking became harder as the voices grew more distinct. They were talking about me. Wionega, white person. Duyuk TV, do you hear? Gvialialitsi, she listens well. I understood enough Cherokee to catch fragments of the conversation. The voices seemed to be discussing my presence, my equipment, my years of studying their sacred sites. Some sounded approving. Others seemed cautious. All sounded impossibly real. I stood up and walked closer to the largest stone formation. The voices were definitely coming from inside the limestone structure. I could see my breath misting in the suddenly cold air, despite the warm June evening. "Hello?" I called out in Cherokee, using the formal greeting Joseph had taught me. "Sio, Dohi?" The voices stopped instantly. Complete silence filled the amphitheater. Even the normal night sounds of insects and distant owls went quiet. My equipment continued recording, but the frequency displays showed only flat lines. Then, one voice spoke directly to me, clear as if someone stood 3 feet away. C.O. Patricia Silverman. The pronunciation was perfect, despite Cherokee having no natural equivalent for my English name. We have been waiting for you to hear us. I nearly dropped my notepad. The voice was speaking English now, but with the same harmonic, resonant quality as the Cherokee conversations. It seemed to come from the stone directly in front of me, a pillar of limestone that stood 12 feet tall and 4 feet wide. "Who are you?" I asked, amazed that my voice worked at all. "We are the Nahi, the ancient ones, the first people who learned to speak with stones." My anthropology training kicked in. Vnahi was an old Cherokee term for ancestral spirits. According to traditional beliefs, the dead could communicate with the living through certain sacred objects and places, but I wasn't ready to abandon scientific thinking entirely. "This is some kind of acoustic illusion," I said, more to myself than to the voice. "Sound reflection, frequency modulation, something." The voice laughed. The sound echoed from multiple stones around the amphitheater, creating a chorus of gentle amusement that raised goosebumps across my skin. "You study our voices with your machines," the voice said. "You measure our words with numbers, but you do not yet understand what you are hearing." "Then explain it to me," I said, setting down my notepad and focusing entirely on the conversation. "We are the voices of those who walked these mountains before you. Cherokee, who lived here, hunted here, conducted ceremonies here for 1,000 years. When our bodies returned to earth, our spirits remained connected to the sacred stones." I wanted to argue, to point out the logical impossibilities, but my equipment was recording every word with crystal clarity. This wasn't hallucination or imagination. Something was definitely communicating with me through these stone formations. "Why now?" I asked. "Why are you speaking to me?" "Because you listen with respect," the voice replied. "Because you learned our language and our customs before judging our beliefs. And because danger comes, that requires the help of both spirits and living people." "What kind of danger?" The voice paused. Other whispers started up around the amphitheater, multiple conversations in Cherokee that I couldn't follow. The harmonies grew more complex, more urgent. "Men will come soon," the voice said finally. "Men who wish to destroy this place. They will bring machines to break the stones and silence our voices forever. You must help us prevent this." "What men? What are you talking about?" But the voices were already fading. The harmonies dissolved into single tones, then into whispers, then into silence. My equipment showed the sound levels dropping back to normal background noise. I stood in the quiet amphitheater, staring at my instruments and trying to process what had just happened. My recordings would provide proof that something extraordinary had occurred. But proof of what? Exactly? I just had a conversation with voices claiming to be Cherokee ancestral spirits. They'd warned me about some unspecified threat to this sacred site. And despite my scientific training, I couldn't think of any rational explanation for what I'd experienced. The worst part? Deep down, I believed every word they'd said. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my camp chair, headphones on, monitoring for any return of the stone voices. My equipment hummed quietly in the darkness. The normal sounds of the mountain night seemed unnaturally loud after the profound silence that followed my conversation with the Nvinahi. Around 4 a.m., I radioed Joseph Swimmer. "Joseph, it's Patty. I know it's early, but I need to ask you something." Static crackled for a moment before his voice came through, alert despite the hour. "You heard them, didn't you? The ancestors. How did you know?" "Because I felt them stirring yesterday. Their energy has been building for weeks. The stones have been calling to me in my dreams." He paused. "What did they tell you?" I described the entire encounter, the harmonious voices, the Cherokee conversations, the warning about men coming to destroy the site. Joseph listened without interruption, occasionally making soft sounds of acknowledgement in Cherokee. "They spoke truth," he said when I finished. 3 days ago, the tribal council received a letter from a mining company. Cumberland Stone Corporation wants to expand their quarry operation into the sacred amphitheater. They claim the limestone there is perfect for highway construction. My stomach dropped. The state would never allow that. This area is protected. The company has lawyers. They found old claims from the $1,000 940 that might override our cultural protection agreements. The hearing is scheduled for next week. Now I understood the urgency in the spirit voices. Their sacred site, the place where they'd learned to communicate through stone over countless generations, faced destruction by industrial mining equipment. "What can we do?" I asked. "Document everything," Joseph said. "Record their voices. Get evidence that this site is actively sacred, not just historically important. The more proof we have of ongoing spiritual activity, the stronger our legal case becomes." "You want me to record ghost voices as evidence in a legal proceeding?" "I want you to record the truth," he said firmly. "Whatever that truth is." I spent the morning reviewing my equipment and expanding the recording array. If the spirits were going to provide evidence, I needed to capture it with absolute clarity. I positioned microphones around the entire amphitheater, set up video cameras to document any visual phenomena, installed seismic sensors to record ground vibrations. By evening, I had created the most comprehensive acoustic monitoring setup of my career. The voices returned at sunset. This time, they didn't start with gentle humming. The stones erupted into full conversation immediately, as if dozens of Cherokee speakers had suddenly materialized throughout the amphitheater. Men, women, children, elders, all talking at once in overlapping discussions. I scrambled to monitor multiple recording channels simultaneously. The conversations were happening too fast for me to follow, but certain phrases kept repeating. Mvedagi, USD. The White Mountain, Tsunsdi Ale Mve Hai, Rabbit and Earth, Galvladi Degataga. Sacred places. Then I heard something that chilled me to the bone. Children's voices. Young Cherokee children, speaking in the old language, their words carrying the musical laughter of kids at play. According to tribal history, children had often participated in stone-speaking ceremonies, learning to communicate with ancestral spirits as part of their cultural education. These children had died decades ago, maybe centuries ago, but their voices rang clear and joyful through the limestone formations, as if death was just another kind of distance they could speak across. "Patty," called the familiar voice from the large pillar. "Come closer, we have much to show you." I walked to the center of the amphitheater. The voices swirled around me like a gentle storm. Cherokee words creating patterns of meaning I could almost understand. "Place your hands on the stone," the voice instructed. I hesitated. My scientific training warned against contaminating the experiment, but my 16 years in these mountains told me to trust what I was experiencing. I pressed my palms against the limestone surface. The world exploded into vision. Suddenly, I could see the amphitheater as it had existed centuries ago. Cherokee families gathered around small fires, children learning songs from their grandparents, medicine men conducting ceremonies that connected the living with the spirits of the dead. I watched generations of people coming to this place to seek guidance from the Envanahi, saw the careful rituals that maintained the connection between stone voices and human ears, witnessed the profound respect with which the Cherokee treated this sacred site. Then the visions changed. I saw white settlers arriving, saw the Cherokee being forced from their ancestral lands, watched as the sacred sites were abandoned, the ceremonies forgotten, the connections between worlds slowly weakening. But through it all, the stones remembered, the spirits remained, waiting patiently for someone who could hear them again. "Now you understand," the voice said as the visions faded. "This place is not just sacred because our ancestors used it. It is sacred because we are still here." I pulled my hands back from the stone, gasping. The amphitheater looked normal again, but I felt fundamentally changed. The boundary between scientific observation and spiritual experience had dissolved completely. "The mining company," I said. "What happens if they destroy the stones?" "We will be silenced forever," the voice replied, and now I could hear the sadness in its harmonic tones. "Our connection to this world will be broken. The knowledge we carry, the guidance we offer, the protection we provide, all lost." Around the amphitheater, other voices began speaking. Not in Cherokee this time, but in English, as if they wanted me to understand every word. "My name was Running Bear," said a young man's voice from a formation to my left. "I died fighting to protect our lands in 1838. I've been watching over this place for 158 years. "I was called Gentle Rain," said an elderly woman's voice from my right. "I taught children the old songs until I was 97 years old. I passed in 1912, but I still sing for those who will listen." More voices joined in. Dozens of Cherokee spirits, each one identifying themselves, sharing their stories, explaining their connection to this sacred site. Warriors and medicine men, mothers and children, farmers and hunters, all of them bound to this place by love, loss, and spiritual responsibility. "We are the guardians," said the original voice. "We watch over the living Cherokee. We guide them through difficulties. We preserve the knowledge that might otherwise be forgotten. But if the stones are destroyed, then we become truly dead," the voice said simply. "And our people lose their connection to everything that came before." The conversation continued for hours. The spirits shared their history, their concerns, their hopes for preserving their sacred site. They spoke of modern Cherokee who still visited the amphitheater secretly, seeking guidance and spiritual connection. They described their role as protectors, warning the living about dangers, helping lost travelers find their way home. Most importantly, they gave me specific information about the mining company's plans, details that could only be obtained through supernatural awareness. Cumberland Stone Corporation intended to begin excavation in 10 days. They planned to work at night to avoid public attention. Their equipment would arrive from a staging area 15 miles north, using old logging roads to bypass the main park entrances. "How do you know all this?" I asked. "We hear everything that happens on our mountain," the voice replied. "We see through the eyes of animals. We listen through the wind in the trees. Nothing occurs here without our knowledge." As dawn approached, the voices began to fade. But before they disappeared completely, the original speaker gave me one final instruction. "Bring Joseph Swimmer tomorrow night," the voice said. "We will need his help for what comes next." "What comes next?" "The final proof," the voice said. "Evidence that even lawyers cannot argue against." The stones fell silent as the sun rose over the Unicoi Mountains. I sat surrounded by my recording equipment, overwhelmed by what I'd experienced. My instruments had captured every word, every harmony, every impossible conversation. I had evidence of active spiritual presence at the sacred site, but I also had something more disturbing: detailed advance knowledge of a mining company's illegal excavation plans. The Cherokee spirits weren't just asking me to preserve their sacred site. They were asking me to stop a crime that hadn't happened yet. Joseph Swimmer arrived at the amphitheater just before sunset, carrying a leather bag and wearing traditional Cherokee clothing I'd never seen him wear during our previous meetings. His expression was grave. "They spoke to me in dreams last night," he said, setting his bag down near the largest stone formation. "The ancestors are preparing for something they haven't done in over a century." "What do you mean?" "Full manifestation," he said, beginning to remove items from his bag. "Tobacco, sage, a carved wooden flute. They're going to show themselves completely, not just voices, physical presence." My scientific training rebelled. "That's impossible." Joseph looked at me steadily. "Patty, yesterday you spoke with the spirits of people who died before your great-grandparents were born. Today you're worried about what's impossible?" He had a point. I set up my equipment while Joseph prepared what he called a welcoming ceremony. He burned sage and tobacco, speaking Cherokee prayers that seemed to make the air itself more receptive to spiritual presence. As darkness fell, my sensors began detecting activity before any sounds became audible. Electromagnetic fluctuations, temperature variations, pressure changes that had no meteorological explanation. Then the voices returned, but this time they weren't alone. The air above the stone formations began to shimmer like heat waves. Gradually, translucent figures took shape. Cherokee people in traditional clothing, standing on and around the limestone pillars, men with intricate tattoos and feathered headdresses, women in deer-hide dresses with elaborate beadwork, children with bright, curious eyes. I could see through them, but they were definitely there. My cameras were recording everything. "CO, Joseph Swimmer," said the familiar voice, and now I could see its source, a tall Cherokee man with silver-streaked hair and a face marked by years of wisdom and sorrow. "Thank you for coming." "CO, Elder," Joseph replied formally. "I am honored to witness the great manifestation." The spirit turned to me. "Patricia Silverman, you have listened well. Now you must see all." More figures materialized throughout the amphitheater. Dozens of Cherokee spirits from different time periods. Some wore buckskin and feathers, others wore the cloth clothing of the reservation era. A few appeared in modern-dressed Cherokee who had died in recent decades but maintained their spiritual connection to this sacred place. "We are the unbroken chain," the elder spirit explained. From the first Cherokee to learn stone speaking to those who passed last year, death cannot break our bond to this place. Joseph began playing his wooden flute. The simple melody seemed to strengthen the spiritual manifestations. The figures became more solid, more present. "Why are you showing us this?" I asked. "Because tomorrow night, the mining company begins their illegal excavation," the elder said. "They believe they can work in secret, but we will be waiting." Another spirit stepped forward. This one appeared to be a Cherokee warrior from the early 1800s, with a scar across his left cheek and eyes that had seen too much violence. "I am White Hawk," he said. "I died fighting Andrew Jackson's soldiers on the Trail of Tears. I have been protecting this mountain for 160 years. More warriors materialized, men and women who had died defending Cherokee lands and culture. Their presence filled the amphitheater with an energy that made my skin tingle, and my equipment registers readings I'd never seen before. "We are still here," White Hawk said. "We still fight. And we will not allow our sacred sites to be destroyed." "What are you planning to do?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. The elder spirit smiled grimly. "What we have always done, protect our people and our land by any means necessary." Joseph stopped playing his flute. "You're talking about spiritual warfare." "We're talking about justice," White Hawk replied. "The mining company plans to violate federal law, Cherokee treaty rights, and sacred land protections. They believe they can hide their crimes in darkness. Tomorrow night, they will learn that some guardians never sleep." The implications hit me like a physical blow. The Cherokee spirits weren't just asking for help preserving their sacred site. They were planning to actively defend it against industrial equipment and armed security guards. "People could get hurt," I said. "People will definitely get hurt if this place is destroyed." The elder spirit responded. "The living Cherokee will lose their strongest connection to their ancestors. Our voices will be silenced. Our guidance will be lost. Our protection will end." Around the amphitheater, more spirits were manifesting. I stopped counting when I reached 50 distinct figures, all Cherokee, all connected to this sacred site by love, loss, and spiritual responsibility. "What do you need from us?" Joseph asked. "Witness," the elder said. "Record what happens. Let the world know that the Cherokee dead still defend Cherokee land." "And if the mining crews don't retreat?" I asked. White Hawk's scarred face hardened. "Then they will experience the full protection power of Cherokee mountain spirits. We can make their equipment fail. We can turn their own fears against them. We can show them terrors that will haunt their dreams for the rest of their lives." The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. Frost formed on my equipment despite the warm June evening. The stone formations began glowing with a faint, phosphorescent light that had no scientific explanation. "This is our place, one," the elder spirit said, his voice now echoing with the authority of centuries. "We lived here. We died for it. We will not abandon it to men who value profit over sacred ground." Joseph packed his ceremonial items with reverent care. "The ancestors have made their decision," he said to me. "Tomorrow night, this mountain goes to war." As the spirits began to fade with the approaching dawn, the elder gave me one final message. "Document everything. Patricia Silverman. Let your scientific instruments record the truth of spiritual power. Show the world that some things are more real than what the living can understand." The last thing I saw was White Hawk's scarred face, his eyes burning with the determination of a warrior who had never truly surrendered. Then silence returned to the amphitheater. But the air still hummed with residual energy, and my equipment continued detecting electromagnetic anomalies that would take months to explain. In less than 18 hours, Cumberland Stone Corporation would discover that the Cherokee dead are not as powerless as the Cherokee living had been forced to become. I spent the day preparing for the most important documentation project of my career. Whatever happened that night, I was going to record every second of it. Cumberland Stone Corporation's excavation team arrived at 11:47 p.m. on June 23rd. I watched from my concealed position 200 yards away as 3 heavy trucks made their way up the old logging road. Earth-moving equipment, drilling machinery, a crew of 12 men who believed they could strip mine a Cherokee sacred site under cover of darkness. They had no idea what was waiting for them. Joseph Swimmer crouched beside me, his radio equipment tuned to the company's communications frequency. My acoustic monitoring system was running at maximum sensitivity. Cameras captured everything in infrared and low-light modes. The crew began setting up floodlights around the amphitheater's perimeter. Their supervisor, a heavy-set man in a hard hat, directed the equipment placement while speaking into a handheld radio. Base camp, this is Excavation 1. We're on site and beginning setup. Should have the first load of stone ready by dawn. That's when the temperature dropped. Not gradually, instantly. The ambient air temperature plummeted from 72 degrees to 34 degrees in less than 30 seconds. Frost formed on the excavation equipment. The floodlights began flickering erratically. The crew supervisor checked his thermometer twice, convinced it was malfunctioning. "Something's wrong with the weather monitoring," he radioed, showing impossible temperature readings. Then the stones began to sing. The Cherokee harmonies started softly, barely audible over the machinery noise, but they built quickly, growing in volume and complexity until the entire amphitheater resonated with ancestral voices. The limestone formations acted as natural amplifiers, projecting spirit songs across the mountainside. The excavation crew stopped work completely. They stood frozen, listening to music that shouldn't exist. "What the hell is that noise?" the supervisor demanded over his radio. Before anyone could answer, the equipment failures began. The excavator's engine died without warning. The drilling rig's hydraulics failed simultaneously. Floodlights exploded in showers of sparks. Radio communications dissolved into static filled with Cherokee words that none of the living men could understand. Through my headphones, I heard Whitehawk's voice cutting through the chaos. "Leave this place," he commanded in heavily accented English. "You have no right here." The supervisor grabbed a flashlight and scanned the amphitheater, searching for the source of the voice. His beam passed through the translucent figure of a Cherokee warrior standing directly on top of his excavator. The man's flashlight fell from nerveless fingers. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "Do you see that?" His crew was already backing away from their equipment. Several were pointing at the growing number of Cherokee spirits materializing throughout the sacred site. Warriors with war paint and feathered headdresses, medicine men in ceremonial robes, women and children in traditional clothing spanning 3 centuries of Cherokee culture, all of them standing between the mining equipment and the sacred stones. "This is Cherokee land," the elder spirit announced, his voice carrying supernatural authority. "You will leave now." One of the younger crew members broke completely. He sprinted for the trucks, screaming about ghosts and demons. 2 others followed immediately. But the supervisor and his remaining men tried to restart their equipment. Corporate contracts outweighed supernatural terror, at least initially. That's when the Cherokee spirits stopped being polite. Whitehawk raised his hand, and every piece of electronic equipment in the amphitheater died permanently. Not temporary failure, complete destruction. Circuit boards fried, engines seized, hydraulic systems burst. Other warrior spirits surrounded the remaining crew members, not threatening them directly, but making their presence unmistakably felt. Cold spots that followed the men wherever they moved. Whispers in Cherokee that seemed to come from inside their own heads. Touches from invisible hands that left frost patterns on their clothing. "We're leaving," the supervisor shouted into the darkness. "We're leaving right now." But the spirits weren't finished demonstrating their power. As the mining crew scrambled toward their trucks, the very ground began to shift. Not an earthquake. Something more targeted and deliberate. Limestone blocks that had stood for millennia moved to block the access road. Trees fell across the logging trail with surgical precision. The excavation team found themselves trapped in the amphitheater with 50 Cherokee spirits who had died defending this land. Joseph Swimmer spoke into his radio, using the same frequency as the mining company's communications. "Cumberland Stone Corporation," he said calmly. "This is Joseph Swimmer of the Cherokee Nation. Your crews are trespassing on protected sacred land. You have 30 seconds to withdraw completely, or we file federal charges for violation of the Native American Graves Protection Act." "Who is this?" came the panicked reply. "How are you on our frequency?" "Withdraw now," Joseph repeated. "The Cherokee spirits will allow you to leave peacefully if you go immediately." The supervisor looked around the amphitheater one more time. Cherokee spirits stood on every stone formation, their eyes reflecting the dim starlight. The man's expensive equipment lay in ruins. His crew was in various stages of panic and breakdown. "Pack it up," he ordered. Emergency withdrawal. Leave the equipment. We'll sort this out with the lawyers. The spirits moved aside, creating a clear path to the trucks. But as the mining crew fled, the elder spirit's voice followed them down the mountain. Tell your employers, he called. Tell them the Cherokee dead still guard Cherokee land. Tell them some things cannot be bought or sold or destroyed. Within 15 minutes, the amphitheater was empty, except for Joseph, myself, and the gradually fading Cherokee spirits. Is it over? I asked. For now, the elder spirit replied, but Cumberland Stone Corporation will try again. They will bring lawyers and court orders and claim this was all hallucination. What happens then? Whitehawk smiled grimly. Then we demonstrate that Cherokee justice extends beyond the grave. The spirits dissolved with the approaching dawn, but their message remained clear. The sacred site would be defended by any means necessary. The voices of the dead would not be silenced by the greed of the living. 3 days later, Cumberland Stone Corporation withdrew their mining claim completely. They cited unexpected geological instabilities and unacceptable security risks. The company's insurance investigators found no logical explanation for the equipment failures or the crew's collective accounts of supernatural encounters. But Joseph and I knew the truth. My 16 years as a park ranger had taught me to respect the Cherokee culture and history preserved in these mountains. But that night, in the amphitheater, taught me something more profound. Some connections transcend death itself. I still work these mountains, still study Cherokee sites and acoustic phenomena. But now I listen for more than just wind and echoes. I listen for the voices of those who came before, who still guide and protect their people from beyond the grave. The stones still sing at the summer solstice. Cherokee ancestors still speak to those willing to hear them, and sacred places remain sacred, protected by guardians who will never rest until their people are truly safe. The Cumberland Stone Corporation incident became legend among the Cherokee, but for those of us who were there, it was something more important than legend. It was proof that love of land and people can survive anything, even death itself. Every June, I return to the amphitheater for the solstice. I set up my equipment and listen to the voices of the Envanahi. They share their wisdom, their warnings, their hope for the future. And sometimes, late at night when the stones sing loudest, I hear new voices joining the ancestral choir. Cherokee who have passed in recent years, adding their protection to the eternal watch over sacred ground. The circle remains unbroken, the guardians remain vigilant, and the stones still remember everything,